Okay, we're live, and today we have our European friends joining us. We've got Adrian and Radu. We may have one or two other guys joining us later, but that's fine. We're going to mainly be discussing the idea of where morality and values come from. And we were discussing a little bit a minute ago before we started recording. And I think Adrian has some discussion to make on, and we will get into some other topics too, probably like God and action and how all these things go together between our fundamental axioms or fundamental presuppositions and putting them into action and what the goals are and how that might play into something metaphysical like God even. But I think to start off, Adrian had some discussion to make about the difference between values and morality and where those might come from and how that might differ on the individual level and group level. So we'll get to you guys, but go ahead, Adrian, and tell us what you were thinking on that.
So, yeah, I mean, first of all, hello everyone. First of all, the place to start would be to say what the definitions of morality and values are.
Yeah.
As I understand it, a value comes from within as a personal thing, whatever it could be, personal set of actions that you tend to adopt in a certain situation. The way that you play the game, let's say. As let's say if you're a poker player, if you have an aggressive style of raising, going all in, or maybe a more defensive style, you don't play that many hands. When you do, you play by the numbers or whatever it is. And the morality is the group level rules of the game that everyone tends to agree on to a large extent, or or the rules that they may change over time, but they remain consistent. And the idea is to have as many people uh, playing by the rules, let's say, as possible. So they're a framework for a society to operate. I guess then the next question is, where do they come from, right?
Right. That's mainly what we're trying to get into. And then another,
If you agree with that definition, I guess.
um, for the most part, a point I was making just before we went live or started recording was that for the most part, that makes sense, except the distinct. It's tricky to make the distinction between values and morality because, or here's one area I think is that we need to be really careful with uh, false values, and you could also say false morality. But I think it's easier to say things like materialism or materialistic thinking or materialistic things, like even wealth and beauty. Like those are um, okay to have them as values and maybe even morality, but as values, it's easier to be like, okay, I have a value to work hard, make money, and then
Okay.
you can justify it. But it's easier for a value to slip in, at least on the it's and it gets tricky on the whether
I
it's
get what you're saying.
individual or group. But that's a point I was making the other day too in a post that we sometimes we get into this discussion of value structures, like truth and love are probably at the top, and then you might have some fundamental things at the base, and what's in the middle and whatever else, however you want to structure your value set, which is important. But I feel like the more fundamental thing than that everybody needs to kind of like latch onto, and we're always doing it at least unconsciously, which is another area we will probably get into with the matrix that we were talking about a little bit offline. But so is the idea of watching out for false values and false morality, because
Okay, so a value could be like if you say materialistic uh,
Yeah.
aspect. So you might say the beauty of a picture or a landscape, or
Mm,
let's say some external physical factor
mm,
that you find valuable, or like an element like gold
mm.
has value, and you value that, you treasure it, let's say. Whereas a morality is a framework for behavior, right? But then we're already in two different conversations at
Yeah.
once, so we need to decide which one.
Yeah, it's again, it's tricky because um that's that's true, but they're very closely linked. So yeah, you could say like I want to be beautiful and have a beautiful whatever girlfriend or wife, and I want to have, this and that, a beautiful home, beautiful car. Um that may be somewhere to be okay on the value set, or it might be a false value if you're not careful with it.
But it has
Um,
nothing to do with morality, right?
um,
Immorality is how you got to that, how you achieved that uh,
Probably that,
those
but probably
values.
more so how that then is put into action, or how that then determines a behavior. So, like another value would be like one of the highest values that people often agree on is truth. Truth and love are usually what people will put. That's a
Yeah.
little bit nebulous, but they'll put that at the top. And so, if you're always trying to put truth and love at the top of your value set, then you're gonna usually try to behave. You'll fail often, but at least you'll learn when you fail. Uh, but then,
Mhm.
um, but then the tricky thing with like values compared to false values is okay. Truth and love we always know to uh, try to emulate and put into our behavior and action. But then things like materialism, like yeah, we want to make money, but we don't want that as our primary thing. And then it's even okay to be a millionaire or a billionaire, perhaps, but not with that as probably the primary goal. The primary goal should be truth and love and helping people, making a better world, and maybe things more along those lines. And
Okay.
then
Yeah.
money might come out of that. But go ahead.
But the values are defined by what you see in other people, right? So if you see your neighbor or your brother or whatever has a
Mm-hmm.
nice car,
Mm-hmm.
buys a Tesla,
Mm-hmm.
right? You will value that. You will value the Tesla. You
Yeah,
value your old Volvo or whatever
yeah, and I guess maybe
less.
I guess maybe I'm
And
getting what you're saying more now as um, values are more about like a perception, and morality is more about behavior and putting things into action. And so you
yeah,
could also say something along the lines of like you admire a very truthful person and the love that's in a good family, and all that's doing is like perceiving that value. And then but then it's like how do you put that in action and try to emulate it or mimic it yourself? And that, I guess, that would be more along the lines of morality.
well, your value would be a family and safety and whatever.
Yeah.
But then to protect that value, let's say treasure your family or your
Mm-hmm.
home, you might have some marauding barbarians or someone
Mm-hmm.
threatening it, and you might have to kill them, right? And that would be then a question of morality, where you'd
Right.
have to do a kind of cost benefit analysis of
Right.
whether your value of your family
Mm-hmm.
is greater than the is it worth having a gun, let's say, in your home,
Right.
and would you be prepared to kill for your family? That's a moral question,
Right.
because uh, the collective morality is thou shalt not kill, so you don't kill. The law might say something different, You can protect your property.
Right.
So you have to maybe reconcile the law of God maybe with the law of Caesar.
The meta law or the meta game or the meta rules to the
Right.
game.
But the morality is I guess rules of behavior, and the values are the desired outcome.
Yeah, and okay, Jordan Peterson's made this point, and I've made this point in a lot of posts, and in a minute we'll need to hear a little more from Radu. But the one point on that's important, that especially in this day and age where our environment is becoming like we don't worry so much about literal snakes and literal lions or elephants like maybe our ancestors did for most of human existence. What we worry about, though, is we literally worry about, at least on an unconscious level, the mythological version of those, which is something we talked a minute about offline too, which is like it's a lie, or it's a
perceived threat, right? Not rather than an actual threat.
Well, perceived threat, but like a misperception or a lie or a wrong behavior, whatever it might be. It can be more dangerous than a lion or an elephant. Those things might be dangerous, but you can run away from them, climb up a tree, whatever. Whereas something in your head, like let's say you've got a married couple, and for some reason, let's say the wife sees that a girl is doing something on the guy's social media, and it might be nothing. Maybe the girl's just fascinated with the guy. Who knows? This other woman, but it's nothing. And so then the girl gets the thought in her head, and it could go the other way, guy, girl, guy, it doesn't really matter. But the girl gets the thought in her head, and she doesn't really talk about it.
But that's a perceived threat, right? That's not a lie. That's an imagined.
It's an imagined. Well, it's an imagined threat, but the interesting thing about it is it can become real, and it's happened a lot where the other person is so sure that they're being cheated on that they go out and cheat on the other person. Like that happens a lot.
It's pretty much the Romeo and Juliet story, right?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And that's a story, is, I don't know, it's a very old story, and it happens a lot. But so that's the thing about morality and values and everything else, is it's not always as simple as, am I going to kill a person, or am I willing to kill a person? That is perhaps going to be part of it, and something that needs to cross our mind at one point or another, is what you would do in those unfortunate, violent situations. But also it's like, am I going to need to kill a horrible idea, even if it's going to hurt somebody's feelings? I don't know what example we might want to go with there, or if we would, but
okay. So what I was saying, I think it does stand up what I said about the values being personal, or at least kind of subjective and ever changing.
Yeah.
Whereas morality is a framework for the functioning of a society.
Yeah, we'll put it into behavior or action, but of course there's going to be
or it's a behavior. Let's say that's expected of you.
Right. Although,
whereas you define your values.
There's of course going to be group values. Like, we're all going to at least say that we value truth. We're all going to at least say that we value love, and we're all going to, maybe not all.
But people value truth insofar as they're perceived to be true. Whereas they would lie if they could get away with it. They would lie, or they do lie. If they think they can get away with it, then they lie, right? And sometimes it's worth a good idea to lie. keep the truth from
Yeah.
other people for their own
See,
benefit.
that's the tricky thing is, so on the group level, everybody's going to say, yeah, we agree, we should never lie, and we should be honest and truthful, and love, not hate. You know, those things are going to be like what everyone presents on the group level. But then they might think or behave a little bit differently on the personal level, whether that's and now it's getting tricky, because now it's like, okay, is it morality that's more personal than values? You know, and so that's why I think it goes both
Well,
ways
we can probably at
to a
this
degree.
point get straight into discussion of God, right?
Yeah, but I want to
But
hear.
we don't have to. But
Yeah,
Radu, off you go.
we'll get there. I want to hear what Radu has to say.
Yeah, I agree with you guys, and especially with Adrian, about there being morality and values, and there being a separate, they being very separate. In my experience, my values probably came from my parents, most of them. But I'm thinking about it, like the human brain is when you're born is tabula rasa. You know, it's empty. You have no values in, or maybe you have inherent values, but you're yet to discover them. Right? So values are something that you have to discover. That's why they're very personal. And morality, I think, is more like a moral code, like a law code. Let's say sometimes homosexuality was seen as bad, and some ruler said, okay, we're going to say this, we don't do this anymore. And that became a moral code, which people followed. But to that, I would add another layer, which is even more personal, and that's an ethics. Because ethics is probably unconscious. It depends on the tribe you come from, you know, and it's generational. It depends on the environment you've grown up in, and past traumas, all that. That would be an even deeper level, which would be the unconscious ethics.
Okay.
Oh wow. Okay.
I'm
most
with
conscious
you.
we are of values. We're conscious about the values because we've probably assumed to have them. You know, we've made
Developed them.
values. Yeah, we've developed them.
I'm with you, but Adrian was talking about getting into the idea of God, and maybe that can start to tie these things together. And that's why one thing I wanted to do is talk about
God and the Matrix, right, together.
Well,
the architect.
We'll probably get there in a minute, but one thing I want to talk about is so I might look at the gospel, the word gospel, a little bit differently than most people, and because I think that it's practiced differently than perhaps it should be or was intended, if we can know how it was intended or meant to have been intended or be used. So the gospel, so it's one thing to say what the gospel is, another thing to say which you might say is a value, but then another thing, you know, so that's what the good news is. So the good news is not the death, but the resurrection. And to have the resurrection, or which is really a new life or new consciousness or a new state of being, you have to have the death and the burial. So sometimes that's signified through a ceremony of the bread and wine, but more so the ceremony of baptism. But that is only a symbolic thing. It's completely useless if that's all it is if you just stop at the symbol. What it's supposed to be is a transformation to a I don't know if I would want to use the word of enlightenment, but it's something like that. It's a higher level of consciousness or a higher level of maturity. Now, the reason I say that's important and that people often practice it wrong is because in the gospel it says to go and preach the gospel to the world. And the way that people often take that wrong is they almost take it like this form of activism, like you go out and tell people to get their shit together. You know, but I think what the real gospel would be, and this is kind of like the point, is that the real gospel, that's okay sometimes, but the main thing is that you would preach, because your word isn't just like I'm uttering these sounds from my mouth. The word is every way that you're perceived, which will include making mistakes, and then you say, oh look, here's how I made some mistakes, and here's how I'm learning from it. So the gospel would be people see your life transforming. And
Yeah, I was going to say that.
right.
Mhm.
So and
There's
in
no
a very
preaching
honest,
involved. So
right.
there's no preaching involved in that. They see you, they perceive you as being happy, as having understood the good news of the gospel,
Yeah.
and they say, "Oh, look, this man is happy. Maybe I'll do what he does." But you don't
And
go
that's
knock
the
on the
only
door.
way. That's the only way that transformation comes. So, like in the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, maybe especially, we were talking a little bit about the issue of God and things in some of these live chats, and they want to get it. Some of them want that were maybe more on the atheist standpoint, wanted to get into the whole like, "Hey, prove to me that there's God," kind of thing, or like, "Hey, I can prove to you that there's no God," and that's. It doesn't really work that way. It's that you see, and so maybe
You're
that's
right, yeah.
more like seeing that the there's the behavior is because
Okay, but you jumped a step though, because you're talking already about the resurrection, right? You have to first talk about the death in order to be resurrected. You cannot skip the death phase, right? You cannot avoid doing the Christ-like thing, which is to stand up for truth, right, or stand up for innocence,
right,
and allow yourself to be crucified, or allow an idea to be crucified, you could say, to be killed and scapegoated, right, blamed. You have to, even in your own mind, as a psychological process. When you have to, when you're reaching a phase where you have to take a big jump, a leap of faith. That will send you into a lot of turmoil, and you see it in films all the time. Like, is Indiana Jones going to be able to cross the chasm over to the other side of the to get to the Holy Grail or whatever it is?
Yeah, and he
it's
cheated.
The Holy Grail.
He threw the dust out.
He cheated, whatever. But
yeah,
that's true. Okay, he cheated, but the idea of the leap of faith is you can't know for sure, right? Whether you'll come out the other side,
right.
And under those circumstances, you actually go through a psychological death,
right?
And then that takes you down for 3 days usually. Like Jonah and the whale, or a lot of stories. And in my own personal experience, when I come to some kind of crossroads that I don't want to cross it, but I can't not follow it.
Yeah,
I cannot not follow the path.
Right.
I go through this symbolic death, right?
Yeah.
But it's and I'm sure you do too, right? I'm sure you've experienced that, right?
Yeah.
Before the leap, and you don't always know what it is, and then you emerge and almost like come back to life, and then you have some kind of message to spread to people, right?
Right.
And you do reach a more enlightened state, I guess, because you've overcome some kind of
the dragon
block or death or idea that you couldn't reconcile with reality.
You went to the underworld,
right? Exactly, because your, let's say, maybe your values and morality came into conflict. There was some kind of conflict in your worldview. There was a glitch in the matrix. Say that there was something that didn't sit right, and you reached the point where you realized that you have no choice but to cast something aside. And maybe that would be a conflict between values and morality, or
and I would say you're right, but that's one point I was hoping to clarify too, is that that's where I think this was kind of my point, that Christians are often right, but they get stuck at where they're right. And so part of that is that they see the gospel as make sure everyone repents. That's the death. They get buried. That's the baptism, at least, in a symbolic ceremony. And then they resurrect with the Holy Spirit or whatever. And that's fine. And then they're preaching the gospel is like making sure that everybody does that and then they're saved. And that's fine. But the thing is that has to repeat on, maybe not with the water part, but at least the death and resurrection, that has to repeat on a constant basis. And so some of it will be like a death that will take, you're going to go in the underworld for anywhere from hours to years, depending on what it is that you have to bury or battle with or whatever. And then depending on how that all went, you come up victorious. And then on the other hand, if you don't want to go on the battle, or you lose the battle, which happens, then you have to repeat it, or you stay for longer, or whatever the case. And it's just like anything else in like you could look at. Go ahead.
Well, but I think this is a departure from the idea of values and morality, which are kind of earthly things that you can, I guess, you can control to some extent. You can decide on your values, or they're defined, or the morality is defined for you in a sense.
But let me say why I wanted to go there, which you're right. But the reason I want to go there is because I would say that morality and values are they are what helps you attain a goal. So, and the thing is that people usually get confused on the goal. So they think maybe in a more materialistic way, the goal is just to get converts, or in a even more materialistic way, the goal is to have a Mercedes and a mansion and beauty and those things, which, there may not be anything wrong with those, but they should be more like products rather than goals, or side effects almost.
No, I would say people tie up goals with deadlines. So by the time I'm 30, I want to have whatever Mercedes or whatever it is, and that they will define those goals in order to get them to motivate them to do something else. So motivate them to take the job or the work that they don't really want to do, but in order to achieve the outcome.
Right. Sometimes they'll sort of make a deal with the devil.
Right, and that's how I see goals to a large extent.
Well,
not always, but often it isn't.
So you're projecting your goals ahead. You're planning them like a projection.
Right, and so that's where
your mind to the future.
Well, and so that's what most people do, is they get stuck on these materialistic things, and it's tricky because I feel like often what will happen is people in their 20s and 30s will get really set on those materialistic type goals, Mercedes, mansion, all these beautiful things, whatever, $1 million, whatever it might be. And then at some point, sometimes in a person's 30s or 40s, they might realize, and this might be a sort of transformational journey in the underworld, like you were talking about, Adrian, where they have to kind of readjust their morality, is they say, okay, those weren't the proper goals. The proper goal is something more like a true gospel, which isn't just a one-time thing, but it's more like a transformative thing. And that's really the goal. Like when I had Radu on last time and Milo was with us, we're talking about he has a daughter who's a teenager, and it's like, who's the authority? Is he the authority? Is she the authority? And it's like, really the ultimate authority is their future selves. It's just like the future daughter and really even the future father. And that's really the ultimate authority. And so same thing so the reason I say that is because if we get our goals aligned, which is to have the best future maturity, which is kind of this city of God idea, which may not be an actual metaphysical thing like some people think in a very fundamentalist, literalist sense, but whatever. But it's a city of God thing in that it's a state of being and if you can make that your goal, then you get your morality to help you do that. But if you have the wrong goals, which is more materialistic, then you start making these deals with the devil, and then that's how you get to false values.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that people are not even often aware of these goals, right? This is where you get into the idea of the hero journey, or your higher self, what you could be, and people are not really aware, I would say, of what they could become. And I've seen that because I went to a personal development meetup, just kind of to meet people and impart my wisdom or whatever, just basically to meet people. Whatever. And 1 week, there's different discussions each week. And 1 week, people were saying that the discussion was avoiding negative energy.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, right, exactly. And I said, and then people were saying, well, if I meet someone with negative energy, I just walk away from them, and I just stay away from negative situations, and they were ready to get into discussion about how to stay positive, basically by avoiding negative energy. So I, of course, played devil's advocate, or actually made them think about a negative situation, or a situation where you would have negative energy or negative energy within yourself, where you feel maybe uncomfortable, even though it's obvious what you should do, right? So I gave the example of if you're going on stage for the first time in front of 10,000 people or 100 people or whatever, you're a musician, and you've done small concerts, 500 people or 250 or whatever, but you've got a big gig and you're going to be performing in front of 10,000 people, you're going to be nervous that you're going to screw it up, right? You know, your voice won't be right, they won't like your songs, and you might feel terrible. You might even throw up before the gig, and it could like manifest itself physically, right? That you could not want to do it, but you've worked all your life to be there, right?
Right.
And you feel terrible because of that, right? But does that mean you shouldn't go on stage? Of course not. And everyone said, yeah, of course not. Okay. Right. And then I said, okay, but what if I want to be famous? Well, I said a tennis player. So I want to be, I'm 12 years old, and I want to be the next world #1 at tennis. Yeah. And the immediate reaction was, no, don't get your hopes up. Most people fail, and don't even try, right? To a 12-year-old kid who is obviously talented at tennis, and that's his or her dream to be like a tennis champion. They said, don't get your hopes up. Don't even try, not quite that. And then I said, look,
don't strive.
Yeah, and then I gave the example of, let's say I want to be a painter, right? A famous painter. And I want 1 million people to see my pictures and, appreciate them. Mm-hmm. And they said, no, don't get your hopes up, and you should be painting for yourself. You should be trying to, you shouldn't try to impress that many people. That's just your ego, and you have ideas above your station, and you should just make art for the sake of it. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, okay, not 1 million people, but if I sell one painting for $1 million, I'd be happy too. And then they laughed at that and said, no, that would never happen. And, you should get a day job, basically. And whatever. And then I said, look, why? This is a totally hypothetical situation, whether it's the painter or the tennis player or whatever. Why are you trying to talk me out of it? This is like, it feels like there was 8 people or 7 or 8 people, and they were really being quite aggressive in this hypothetical situation.
Yeah.
Trying to, giving me negative energy, trying to talk me out of my painting career, right? And trying to be someone special. And they really attacked me. And I said, look, guys, you are projecting your own like lack of ambition onto me. You're giving me negative energy, so you don't unconsciously, right? So you don't have to deal with the fact that you don't have any ambitions to be a painter or a tennis player or a famous musician. Even though you'd like to be that, somehow it makes you feel uncomfortable, and you're not even standing by the side of the stage, but already the idea of being someone with that many eyeballs on them already creeps you out and makes you feel, even before you've played the first note on your guitar, you're already thinking, this guy shouldn't do it, because that would maybe be a challenge for me to do it. I'd like to be that person, but I could never do it, so I'm not even going to get started. And then that was 1 week.
You should have taken their first bit of advice and distance yourself from negative people. Leave the group.
Right. I mean, it was a hypothetical situation, right? So, that's what I would do in a normal situation. But here you're in a group, and it's like personal development and how we're going to become better people and whatever. And then you get a bunch of people telling you, don't bother.
Yeah.
So, and then the funny thing was, the following week, the topic was the meaning of life.
Okay.
Right. A stupid topic. Someone suggested it, and it's just an open kind of discussion. And there, like, everyone's like gazing up at the sky and saying, or the ceiling, and saying, follow your dreams, be who you want to be, and don't take any shit from anyone, and you could be anything you want to be, and all this stuff. And I was like, last week you told me the exact. You told me it wasn't the same people, but it could have been.
Okay.
It was like different people each week, but maybe there was something. And it's like the last week you told me the exact opposite, or the same people would have told me the exact opposite, which is don't even try, right? This week, they're saying the meaning of life is to be the highest, best, have a goal and pursue it, and dream and dare to dream, right? And they don't realize that they have this cognitive dissonance, right? Which is, I'm not sure how it ties back to morality and values, but that they have a value to try and be the best person you can be, but they're held back from doing that by some kind of fear of being different.
In the meaning of life thing, they're more so trying to embody it as themselves for the most part.
Always individualistic as well. They would always say, chase your dream, don't care about anyone else's dream. So there was no question of being a good person, or behaving morally correctly, or ethics, or whatever, or having values. So in that discussion, I brought into it a kind of idea of transcendence. If you're under the stars smoking a joint, and you feel this, like this sense that the world and the universe has some kind of meaning, and you're resonating with it, or these kind of ideas. And everyone said, I've been to a concert, or a beach, or whatever, or I've had sex, or whatever, or taken drugs, where I've had that feeling of the universe has some kind of meaning, and I'm at the center of it, and wow. That's like, Brad was shaking his head,
Because it's not true, in my opinion. I don't think
Which
most
part?
of us we're not individuals. Like, especially because we're Carl Jung readers and we understand what the unconscious is. How can we say that most of us are individuated?
No, I'm saying that most
Even
people, almost everyone I've spoken to, when I ask people,
I
have
know.
you ever had a transcendental experience, like listening to music, with another person, in nature, taking drugs, whatever else?
yeah.
And almost everyone can say, yeah, there was a time, and I really remembering it was kind of life-changing, where everything seemed to come together. The moon and the stars seemed to have some kind of meaning, and everything was beautiful, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and it
Hmm.
was just, some kind of awesome thing, right? And but that goes way beyond any concept of morality, definitely.
Well, no,
The values.
that's part of how that we like you said, it can be a life-changing experience, because a lot of the morality, whether it's our goals or our axioms, they don't always necessarily make sense, but we can just have this like experience of awe of like the universe makes sense, even if saying that doesn't make sense. But just that there's some big powerful force or whatever you want to call it that can
It
make
has nothing to do with individuation, Radu, by the way. I don't know.
I know, but I'm just thinking of these people who do signs like cops should do ayahuasca, and they think that if cops do ayahuasca, that'll solve the problem. I don't think that'll solve any problem.
if,
I don't know. I've never done ayahuasca, so I don't know.
It's a substance.
I know what it is, but I've never done it. So lots of people some people have told me
I
that
don't.
yes,
I don't think taking these kind of substances solves anything, because you don't most of the times you don't bring anything back. You have this experience of you being the center of it all,
you
but
bring
you
a
can't
different
bring
experience,
it back.
a different perspective and a different experience back. So it's not like you have a word like there was a vision or a oracle in your mind or a spirit that said, love people more or do this or that. It's that you have a different feeling, a different perspective, and a different.
but you
But it doesn't
suddenly,
last.
very suddenly, become totally detached from reality, right?
Yeah. So why
So,
aren't you attached all the time so you can have that, rather than taking the substance to be detached and then you're attached to the substance?
well, people who take ayahuasca take it like once every 3 months or once in a lifetime. It's not
Attached.
like,
It's still kind of they still go back. Very rarely do people go and do this and never go back. Most people
yeah,
go
but
back.
I mean, you don't do it every weekend or every night.
Yeah, you do it more rarely, but you're not supposed to do it twice. If you didn't get it the first time.
yeah, well, so yeah,
Yeah, I
get
mean,
a different experience, different perspective, and then from that, well, it's because if you just always have your egotistical, I gotta survive and make money perspective, like sometimes we get caught up in, especially like, oh, I gotta get a Mercedes and this and that. That's how we get caught up in that. Well, I have never done psychedelics like that, but from what I hear, it's similar to a religious experience, and that's why people talk about it. It's like an induced religious experience, and then what that does is helps people not think of things the same way, as far as so individualistic or materialistic, but just more like a
interconnected thing, right? They
yeah,
become part of something bigger than themselves, I
The
guess.
right,
easiest way to have a spiritual experience of this kind is sensory deprivation. And why does that work? Because once you don't get information from your senses, you're not attached to your senses anymore, then your mind can go somewhere else. So it's your senses which always keep you here, because you
Yeah.
feel, because you
yeah.
see, because you hear. I'm paying attention to you because I'm seeing and hearing you.
And that's sort of what happens in meditation if you do it properly, and it can happen in other forms like that, even just uh, prayer, where all you're doing is sitting there with your eyes closed, whether you're talking or thinking, but it's like a form of meditation where you're not involved in seeing, and you for the most part turned off all your senses, and then your mind can kind of speak and connect, and your thoughts start to flow differently. And
Okay. Yeah.
In order to listen, you have to stop talking. That's all I have to say.
yeah,
So you have to stop your brain, stop your senses, and then you can listen. You can have attention, not focus. Focus is a concentrated effort, while attention, you're not trying to pay attention. You're just receiving everything. You're accepting whatever is into your perception. And
Yeah.
that's
Well,
more
we can get into the matrix from here.
yeah.
Because there's a very strong the drug connotation of the red pill and the blue pill, right?
Yeah.
You take the red pill and nothing will be the same, but you can't go back. So
go down the rabbit.
Go down the rabbit hole, exactly. And you can take that in the direction of maybe conspiracy theory thinking or conspiracy research, looking into whatever conspiracy of choice.
Because once you know
that's how it's used on the internet. That's why I said that. Yeah. The other idea is the truth of your own psyche, right? That you are part of the matrix, right? And the matrix is our culture, our morality, our values, the physical world we live in, everything around us that could be potentially a simulation, right?
Right. Our psychological world that's at least 99% unconscious.
Which is, our environment is you could say imposed on us, right? The matrix.
Right. Which is
mostly... we're not really aware of what it is and how it works.
Right.
And what our role in it is. We generally speaking, we just go with it. We follow the paths of morality. We go with the herd. We just go about our daily lives, right? There's no question of any higher force or anything. There's no question of any truth beyond what we accept to be true, right? In terms of the physical objects we come into contact with, or in terms of the morality that we live in, the truth that we have defined for ourselves, right? But what if beyond that there's an unknown rabbit hole of our own psyche that works in a completely different way, and that's the kind of idea of the matrix, right? That you can maybe, if you talk about it in Jungian terms, through the right kind of mind ability to bend reality, let's say.
Okay.
Ability to bend the reality of the matrix, you can overcome all kinds of physical or perceived barriers, right? In your interactions with other people, in your interactions with objects, and in your interactions with yourself. It's like a process of mind over matter that happens in the film, and obviously that's played out in an action film. But what we were talking about before is that in your own psychological world, you confront the matrix, the values imposed on society as a part, which are passed down through generations of culture, religions, or legal codes or morality, or city structures, or whatever, school systems, or whatever else, education. All those things we inherit and from our parents and our grandparents and generations back and through history, and slavery or whatever else. The idea of slavery comes up in the Matrix. I just watched it. The idea of slavery and the legacy of slavery, and the idea that Morpheus has, that we have to save our people from the Matrix, which is very like a religious, or like Moses and Exodus kind of idea, to break the Matrix somehow, and to
Just wondering, I haven't seen
break
the
out of it.
long time, but people get out of the Matrix naturally, right? Morpheus, for example, was he taken out, or did he somehow awaken from that? I don't really remember.
I don't remember. I haven't seen all of it.
Anybody gets out naturally. They're either born in the real world, which there didn't. I don't think there were a lot, but there were some that were born in Zion, the sort of underground real world, and then there were.
How did the first guy escape, I wonder?
No, well, there was a big war, right? And I'm sure some people survived the war.
Yeah,
and then they rescued, and they were able to look through the code, right?
Yeah,
and see what's happening, and they identified people worth rescuing. I guess the most talented minds.
So I guess when it first started, there were, I don't know how many people, if it was hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands, whatever, that sort of escaped, which is a metaphor always. If it's something that goes underwater or goes underground, that's a metaphor for the unconscious. So it's like humanity went into the unconscious, and then on the outside, above ground was this monster matrix, and then in the middle of that, or sort of at the connecting point of the ground, so to speak, or the surface between conscious and unconscious, is ourselves, our souls, but we didn't know that that's where we were. It was as on this sort of border of
the city was underground, wasn't it?
What's
it was
that?
Somewhere underground. The city Zion was somewhere underground, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so it was underground, and so when there was a war that was raging all over ground, but as the machines took over, then the people went underground, although somewhere in that they scorched the skies, as they say. They thought that they could win if they made this sort of everlasting clouds in the sky, so they couldn't use solar power.
Yeah, right.
And then that's when they're like, oh, well, gotcha, we'll just plug you into the Matrix forever.
Also, this is a different iteration of the Matrix. It's not the first time, because they said they built it once, they didn't. It was too perfect. People didn't believe in it, and this is like the third or fourth time. So maybe just a bad script. I don't know, but
yeah, it's tricky, because then they get into all these. Then as you get into the other ones, they say that there has been, I forget how many times there's been the one. So it sounds like there's, well, and the time, I think the time is at least 100 years, 100, 200 years in the future.
Yeah, 22 something.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of, they've run this thing like a bunch of times. And then it goes a little bit differently every time, which is similar to it's more, which is what's interesting, is a lot of times they will sort of merge biblical sort of metaphor with Buddhist metaphor, because in Buddhism, the actual Buddha, or maybe not every sect of Buddhism, but a lot of the main ones, they, at their, I don't know, main temple in China or whatever, they have who they think is the actual Buddha, who was born as the reincarnated Buddha, which is similar to what happens with Neo, the One. They say like every generation there's going to be the one that is going to, that they have to find, and they'll go through this whole journey. And so anyway, it makes it really tricky to figure out our reality. But how that, I guess, all ties in is that what we try to do. So, to the question of where morality comes from, is we have our axioms, our presuppositions, and I was reading something last night. It was the book I was posting about on the problem of pain by C.S. Lewis. But he made another point in that where like you can't really rationalize morality, like any fundamental axiom or any of these presuppositions. The only rationality for it, you can't rationalize it in and of itself. You can it's only rationalizable because it works, and it works in particular towards attaining a goal, which is more towards something that Jordan Peterson gets into a lot with some of these things we've been talking about the last few weeks. And so how that things work is they work at attaining a goal. And so the goal is always, okay, sort of to the matrix metaphor again, is they're always trying to overcome the matrix, and Zion is sort of like this heavenly word of like the city of God too. They're trying to go from that city of God to a world where everyone is out of the matrix and everything, and they overcome the matrix, which I think is kind of what's going to start to happen in part 4. But so it's kind of this goal of attaining the city of God, which is a state of being.
Okay,
But,
right. There's an important thing to notice is that there's a collective goal, right? There's like maybe 7 or 8 people, right, in the ship, the Nebuchadnezzar, right?
Yeah.
There's 7 or 8 people, and their goal, their life passion, right?
Yeah.
Their goal is to rescue people from a world that they're not even aware is a simulation. Right. The people are living in it, and they feel they have no idea that they even need rescuing. Right. And there's 7 or 8 of them, and they believe they have some kind of morality that it's not worth living in the matrix. The matrix is not
a place
to be. It's a lie. But there's no. If those people are convinced that the matrix is okay for them, right, because they live in the matrix,
but not all. Some look for ways out. So there's also some morality present in the members of the matrix.
And the people in the simulated world, right? In 1999.
For the white, he was a hacker, right? And he was searching for stuff like this, and he met the white rabbit or whatever.
Exactly. So
he was searching for it. He already had something going.
And the reason I watched it now is because it feels very much like we're in this kind of matrix situation, where there's some kind of the world, the reality we live in does not add up, right? What we're seeing does not make sense anymore. Like even if it ever did make sense, now everything has become a hashtag. Everything has become diabolical. It's not symbolic. When you wear a mask, you feel gagged, or you feel restricted. Your freedom is restricted, and it's hard to square the morality, let's say, of wearing a mask.
Right.
Like you're wearing a mask so that other people don't get infected. The chances are you're not infected yourself. So why wear a mask? And everyone, whatever you can believe.
Yeah.
It depends. It depends what you believe.
Right.
At this point, right?
Well,
at that point, you come up against a whole bunch of other people who are very steadfast in their beliefs, and you can't present them with any kind of truth, right?
You shouldn't try to. It's not a good idea.
Well, that's my question. Is then should you try and rescue them from the matrix? If you take us back into the matrix, or do you just kind of withdraw yourself from the world and not, let's say, become the Neo figure, right? who feels
Someone with
he feels a moral obligation to rescue his people,
Well, so that's the tricky thing is
humanity.
nobody can wake up unless they want to. So it's like a lot of the people that are out there, like, wearing masks and fighting people who don't want to wear masks and all this stuff. And, there's a bunch of examples of that. It's kind of like supporting their group lie or their misconception.
Well, it's virtue signaling, right? But
it's
it's a denial of their own lack of virtue.
Well, yeah, and we were talking about this a little bit off air before we started, but the thing with the whole COVID situation is that would probably make a lot of sense. If COVID made you a lot sicker and or the mortality rate was a lot higher, or even let's even say that the mortality rate was something not much higher, like 1 or 2%, but like a healthy person could die from it. But almost no healthy people can die from it.
Right, but then the issue is if you challenge this narrative, right?
Yeah.
That we're all going to die of this.
Yeah.
And it's a horrendous thing, and it's worth. What I hear politicians and also people saying is doing everything we can to save lives. Right? When does doing everything you can to save lives become immoral? Because it's costing more lives than it's saving, right? Or costing more in terms of people's physical and mental well-being, or quality of life.
And that's the thing is, we were talking about this before we started recording, but it's like they want to cover up lies with lies, or mask with more mask, where they could just come, like, that's I guess what makes, I think, people like us, maybe red pill people, the most pissed off, is that nobody will come out and just say in plain language, hey guys, good news, the virus isn't as big as we predicted back in March, so here's the plan to release these restrictions. It's only dealing with the psychological game, but they won't say that.
The big objection I had to lockdown at the beginning was, how do you roll it back? Right. How do you restore normality? How do you bring things back to the way they should be, which is people being able to congregate and spend time together and do all those natural things that.
And that's why all these riots are happening. It's like there were at least 4 or 5, of these, whether they were racially charged or whatever, in Ferguson, Milwaukee, and 2 or 3 others during the Obama administration, but they only lasted like a weekend because people could go and hang out with their friends, But now it's like we've been psychologically deprived from real human interaction. So now it's like, oh, we can riot and hang out with strangers again at the same time. Cool, let's do it, And the thing is, it's unconscious, because most people don't realize that's why and what's going on, and why this is like lasting for weeks when it shouldn't. And protests started before the whole George Floyd thing and everything. They were totally peaceful. People just maybe holding up a sign that it's fascism to keep people in their houses forever, or house arrest or whatever. And then, so protests had already started about a month earlier.
Well, okay, but let's just watch the media, the way the media behaves around these things, right? They kind of encourage it and condemn it at the same time, and it's
it gets liberalism, because when it was pre-George Floyd, when they would say it's like whatever that it seems like the protesters are protesting, then the media will try to say if it's like a Democrat or Republican side, and then of course if it seems more Democrat liberal, then they lift it up, and if it's seems more Republican conservative, then they condemn it.
Yeah, but the more and more, like, the more engaged you get in this, the more it feels like a simulation, right? It's all
Totally.
it's all a game. You're watching TV, and there's all these experts talking, and there's all this like a mock outrage and hashtags, and you know, it feels like less and less like the reality of my life in Budapest or your life.
So reality in like real terms is just people staying alive and trying to mature and make a more livable, mature world. That's reality. But then you get all these like lies on top of it of like what that is and how to do it. And then people have to justify those lies. And so this gets into the whole like, okay, more values and morality are confusing because it's so easy to get fake ones confused with real ones, both whether that's from a religious thing or political thing or whatever.
Right.
Background is. It's easy to lift up a fake morality. And I guess I touched on it a little bit, but I think a lot of and this is a post I made a few days ago, that, you know, if a religion or an ideology is helping you overcome your ego, then it's working properly. But most of them, whether they're political or religious, at least for most people, but not purely, the way they operate is the opposite. They help people elevate their egos.
Right, exactly. And they impose a set of rules on other people because the idea, the motivation behind, maybe this the motivation behind morality, right? And I heard Jordan Peterson talk about this when he said, people ask for more government control, and the reason why is because they believe everyone else to be bad. Right. So they want more controls, more regulations, because people can't be trusted, right? They don't realize that by doing that, they are losing their own freedom.
Yeah.
So they're curtailing their own freedom by demanding more regulation and more control on others. So you want more police on the street to protect you from crime. The result of that is that you get more police on the street, and that makes you feel uncomfortable, and that makes you feel like there is more crime because they must justify the need for police, right? So you get into this vicious circle of everyone perceiving more danger, less stable society, more crime, more, let's call them just bad people, or let's say, and dangerous people, more rapists on the street and pedophiles or whatever, in order to impose more control on society, which results in less freedom for themselves, right? And that's kind of what I see in the Matrix. But we also, but that's the Matrix is a consequence of artificial intelligence, gone mad, gone wild, gone out of control, right? They built AI, and this is the result of it. Humans lost their power. So that's one way. That's one way the Matrix can come about, is through artificial intelligence, technology getting out of control. The other way is through
a psychological system,
a Christ figure on the positive end of the scale, right? The Neo figure, or whatever, the savior, or saviors, or Buddhas, or whatever. And on the negative end of you get the Darth Vader types, or the Stalin types. And as I said, I spoke to a friend a couple of weeks ago. He reads a lot of history books on Che Guevara and these big historical figures. And he said, well, you can say what you want about Stalin, but at least, but he was a real communist. So he was completely committed to the communist ideal.
Mm.
The lie of communism, right?
The
You
value
don't agree?
of it.
The-
You don't agree, Radu, with that?
I
But
agree
I don't.
partly. He was fully into the party of it, the Communist Party controlling everything. But
Yeah.
the communism, in the way Marx entitled it, was international communism. It spans the whole globe.
Yeah, it has to.
While Stalin was, on the other hand, a national communist. He cared for his country. He didn't care for expanding it all over the world.
Well, it doesn't matter how far it extends, right? Whether it's Russia or
Oh, it matters.
the Soviet Union, right? It matters to
my border, and
Romanians, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
we
But
don't get.
that's the idea of what he said was a single individual, right, can be so committed or powerful in a kind of mafia organization, a kind of godfather figure, that exactly that they can spread evil throughout millions and millions of people and kill millions of people through.
Too is it traps the leader too, because
Right.
so the leader might look super powerful, whether that's Stalin or Kim Jong-un or Mao. They might put on this image that they're this super happy, powerful person, but they're really, really not free. They're trapped in this really like a cage that they put themselves into, because they have to prop up this system. I mean, they might have material things, but they have to prop up this system to keep up this image, because
they have to surround themselves with hitmen and thugs and unscrupulous people, right? To impose their ideal, right?
right.
And they have a moral, a massive moral problem that they probably can't overcome, right? The fact that they're true. Let's say Stalin is a true communist. He believes in furthering like equality for humanity, right?
Mm.
But in order to achieve that, you have to kill 100 million people, right? And that's there's no morality that can justify that.
Yeah.
But in terms of the ideal of the values, let's say his personal values, trumps any idea of morality. So you can kill as many people as you want.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I mean, this is the question. I don't know enough about someone like Stalin, whether he's megalomaniac, or he actually believed in the values, as my friend
Take, for example, Genghis,
claimed.
a different example, similar to Stalin, Genghis Khan.
Mm.
He didn't believe he was that great for nothing. He believed that it was his mission to kill people and to revitalize the world by killing people, because these are bad people. They
Right,
should
exactly.
be exterminated. And he thought he was doing God's work. There's actually letters between the Vatican and him, and he's saying, "Oh, look what a good job I'm doing. I'm killing all these people."
Right, and there's no question that by today's standards, that's absolutely immoral and reprehensible,
But back then,
like slavery, which is a topic right now.
That's why the issue, really, I think that we always have to remind ourselves of, it's not even an ideology problem or a religion problem or a political problem. Exactly. These are human problems.
Exactly, yeah.
Because whatever ideology you put yourself behind, whether it's a political party or a religion or a twisted form of what you might call humanism, any of it can go off the rails and do horrible things, depending on how it goes. And so but okay, this is why it's important to hold certain values or morals as things that we always have to have. So some of them are going to be nonviolence, and then another is going to be free speech, because the more we can freely speak ideas and not worry about violence, the more truth will come out.
I would say values, positive values.
Yeah.
So you can have values. Let's say You can have values that go upwards,
Yeah.
in the direction of the higher self or Christ, or you can have values that go downwards. Right? Most people in the middle modulate between the two. Right? They if their boss tells them to do something they don't agree with, that is against their values, they just do it without, because they don't want to lose their job and it's not worth it.
Right.
So most of us modulate between being good and bad. And the example you said was good, that maybe someone does what their boss says all day at work, and then comes home and kicks the cat and beats the wife and shouts at the children. Right. To
The face.
counteract having to be so good or obedient or whatever. But that can I would say that can modulate all the way up to the hero level of the individual Christ-like savior, and all the way down to the Pablo Escobar type bad guy.
Right, especially because the Pablo Escobar, I don't know his history really well, but you could at least say so with someone like Stalin. They believe that they are righteous. Same thing with Hitler. They believe that they were doing the righteous work of creating a better world and all those things. No matter how many people they had to kill and everything else. And it's fitting to call it a deal with the devil, even aside from metaphysical, spiritual things, because once you start accepting certain lies and you start promoting certain lies, then it's like a infestation of false morality and horrible behavior.
Contradictions, right?
Not just damaging. Contradictions, but because a lot of what fueled World War II, for example, was the Germans' hatred for Jews. There were at least a couple examples where Germany could have potentially won World War II, but they had the opportunity to kill more Jews instead, and they took the latter. So what happened was, and that's kind of like.
Did they do it as a people? Did they have a meeting and they all agreed, hey, we're gonna do this and lose the war?
They never knew that in advance.
Oh yeah,
it was a general, even an unconscious or.
Right. They were blinded by their hate and blinded by their lie, and that's what you see in a lot of stories of Darth Vader and some of these where they get twisted over to the dark side.
Because most of the civilians and also the soldiers, which were German, they had no idea what was going on. So I wouldn't say it was the Germans who fought this.
Okay, let me bring some. Can I bring something?
But okay. I would just say real quick, and we'll go there. But that's why Jordan Peterson, for example, uses the Auschwitz Guard, is because we know that we shouldn't treat people the way that they did at Auschwitz and some of these concentration camps that were mainly.
How do we know how they treated them there? Honestly.
From history and from.
I don't know.
I mean, we may not know a lot of the details, but we know that the body.
I mean, people survived. Right?
Yeah, people survived and told the stories, and for the most part, it corroborated. And there might be some details that are a little bit fuzzy, but we know of and the thing. It goes into the lie behavior that you put in a lie, and you have to put on layers of lies to maintain it. Same thing that happened with Mao's China is they try to keep secret all the deaths and starvation that were going on there, but only in the last decade or two we've figured out how bad that it was, just because they were really good at keeping records. And then modern example in Venezuela that's now super communist is they're now not allowed to, if someone dies from malnourishment or starvation, they're not allowed to put that on the death certificate. They have to say they died from something else. Mm-hmm. So that's just this thing with this whole lies have to perpetuate themselves, and we can see that in personal relationships, whether it's husband, wife, friendship, business relationship, whatever. Once you start lying, you have
And
to
it goes all the way down to the bottom.
right. You have to either cover it up like that, and that's like the bottomless pit to hell, or you
This is where, yeah.
make it right. But
And this is where you get back to the idea of the good news, right?
right.
Shining a light of hope onto those people who
Right.
are in the darkness, let's say.
Right. Because
Lost.
I feel, and then I think you had a point, Adrian, but I would just say that we all could say that there are points in our life where we could go down the hole of darkness, the bottomless pit, and we'd probably have every rational excuse to do so, but not that we're these perfect saints for not doing so, but by not doing that and doing things more transformative, it's not that any of us are perfect, but it's more of like the good news is that we're getting at is that there's a transformation, but to your point earlier, is that only happens with a continual death and resurrection. But
We have to submit to the death, right?
yeah.
In order to, you have to reach rock bottom in a sense, or from the the alcoholics say that. In order to come, yeah.
Well, so it's like, okay, this goes into the garden metaphor or garden story or mythology, whatever. Is okay. Anybody, it's actually probably like the most true story in the world. You could take any example, anything that you shouldn't do, anything. You shouldn't kick a puppy. And then you go and kick a puppy because you want to see what it feels like. And then you can either forever make your life about, hey, kicking puppies is cool, and then justifying that behavior, and that's that bottomless pit. Or you can, that's sort of like the death and resurrection, where you can say, I made a horrible mistake. I shouldn't have kicked that puppy, and I'm never going to do it again. And then it's like an ego death sort of, or a repentance. And now I'm going to try to stop people from kicking puppies. But you can use, it's the same kind of, repentance or making it out of the garden, or, the gospel experience with anything. You can go down the bottomless pit of trying to cover it up, or you can say, hey, I kind of messed up, or totally messed up, whatever the case, and you can try to make it right.
I didn't catch all of that, but when you say kicking a puppy, you could say, I kicked the puppy, or, I murdered 1,000 Jews.
Yeah, it could be anything.
So, and there could be it could be metaphorical.
Right. It could be anything that you know is wrong. If you do the thing you knew is wrong, your options, as soon as you did it, it's sort of like the knowledge of good and evil. Before you did whatever it was, whether it's steal a candy bar or cheat on your spouse, whatever, you can make it right by repentance, which is the symbolic for death or ego death almost. And then you say, hey, I shouldn't have done that, whether that's before God or before your friends or wife or partners, whoever. And then you make it right. So it's like you have the knowledge of you as innocent, and then the knowledge of you as someone who did the thing you knew not to do.
Or and thereby has the potential to do other things similar but much worse.
Right. If you keep covering it up. But then on the other hand, the sort of redeemed or resurrected, the good news is then you can like tell people, hey, look, I used to kick puppies, and now I am a person who helps stop from puppy abuse or whatever it is.
Well, it's enough to say you no longer kick puppies. Yourself.
Well, it's enough.
Actually, the big deal is people really uncomfortable doing this, but saying, yes, I used to be a puppy kicker.
Yeah.
Right? For years, I kicked puppies. Right, and I'm no longer a puppy kicker, and it feels great. If you're a puppy kicker, I can talk you through it.
Right. Yeah.
And you follow my example, it can be done.
That's transforming a person's life to make a better world absent of kicked puppies. Yeah.
Okay. My question is, how did you gain the understanding that kicking puppies is bad? How did you learn that?
So okay.
Because sorry.
Well, I was just
Sorry,
gonna say that was sort of my original thing of we have these axioms, like, and sometimes they use that example of kicking a puppy or punching a baby.
Anything.
It could
How
be
do you
anything.
learn?
It could be anything, but we have this axiom of it's wrong. And sometimes our axioms or our fundamental presuppositions are wrong. Like there are some wrong ones, or we can get some wrong ones. Like we've had slavery, we've had a bunch of wrong ones, and then we can say, but the thing is it's how that it helps us attain a goal. So if the goal is just to be rich and have, make money and screw bitches or whatever.
Okay, I would take this in a bit of a different direction, because when you kick a puppy, right, and this is like Sermon on the Mount kind of stuff, which is
It does something to you inside.
Psychological step by step on how to behave. Right?
Yeah.
When you kick a puppy, that is and in Jungian terms, that's a shadow projection, right?
Mm.
You're kicking a puppy because you'd rather kick someone else, right? You'd rather kick your girlfriend, or you'd rather,
Or the puppy did something that you disliked, and you want to kick the puppy.
What could a puppy do that you dislike? Honestly, like,
It could be. I don't know.
Or what would a baby do that you disliked? I mean, imagine, like, what a cruel, heartless bastard you would be. It's a puppy, right? This is why we use the example of the puppy, because it's innocent, right?
Yeah.
The puppy is the scapegoat, right? There's something you hate about yourself, let's say, or you feel bad about, guilty about, and you kick a puppy to restore peace in your soul. It's the scapegoat mechanism. You know that concept?
Right.
So in terms of in Christ-like idea, or the Jungian idea of never projecting your shadow, is that idea. Don't kick puppies, because you're projecting something about yourself. When you get angry, that's you're usually not getting angry about the actual thing that you're angry about. You're not angry, like you say, Radu, with the puppy.
It's internal conflict.
The puppy doing something. The puppy irritates you because there's something irritating you about yourself.
Well,
there's something you can't deal with.
You have
in that situation, and you need to lash out at something. And it's best if you don't pick a fight with something that's going to hit back. Or if you do pick a fight, that's great, because that justifies you being right. If there's someone in opposition to you, then you have a cause that you're fighting for, and that distracts you from the internal conflict that you have. I don't know if I explained that very well, but
like some people with pillows, they fight pillows, right? When they get angry and they
punch something or slam the door or whatever.
Yeah. Does that really help?
No, not at all.
Well,
so my question about the puppy was
rioting and looting is the same thing, right?
You have a sense of empathy
destructive.
when you kick the puppy and you see the puppy is, crying. Don't you have a sense of empathy where you put yourself in the puppy's shoes, pause, and you feel the same way as he does, and then you say,
you do, because you already felt that way beforehand. Yeah. Right?
So that's
you felt the way the puppy feels.
Exactly.
Right?
So
you psychologically, you feel as crushed as the puppy feels before you after you kicked it, right?
So could we say that
when you kick the puppy, you share the experience of grief, or like whatever, frustration and sadness with the puppy. So then you get rid of your anger, because you feel pity for for the object you've taken it out on, and they will recover or lose significance, right?
This is how a lot of
your issue with yourself will not go away, but peace will be temporarily restored in your heart because you kicked the puppy. Because you feel pity for the puppy, in the same way you feel pity for yourself and you transfer that onto the
Well,
puppy.
it's usually connected to people wanting control because they have their internal conflicts and internal anxieties that they can't control or they can't, get control over. But what they can feel like they can control is imposing something on the outside world. That's often how abusive
Right.
relationships start, is you'll have someone who thinks that they can be more powerful than the other person or control and manipulate the other person, however that they do that. And it's not always physical. Sometimes it's mental, or sometimes they'll use sex to manipulate the other person and the relationship, or whatever the case is. And so it's all about this manipulation thing because they want control, and it's like, really, they wish they could just have control over themselves. And the key to actually having control over yourself is, it's like a paradox. The only way you can do it is you just submit and surrender. And that's why that it works in sort of a metaphorical or literal biblical way, is to submit to a higher power, because then that overcomes your ego, and then the natural morality that's in you can flow through, and then you want to make it right with the puppies or your abusive relationship or whatever the case.
Yeah, and you don't allow the puppy to irritate you with its whining and barking, right? It doesn't get to you anymore, right?
Or
You don't
if it
use
irritates you like, I forget the quote by Carl Jung, but like something to the effect of like, those who irritate us are gonna teach us the most. But
yeah. Everything that irritates you in someone else is what irritates you about yourself.
Right.
What you hate about other people is what you hate about yourself.
Right. There's a lot of quotes like that. But basically, it's that the outside world might have its irritation. It's not to necessarily not let it irritate you. Sometimes that might be the strategy, but it's like, if there's an anxiety in you from whatever source, it's like, I made a post about that the other day. It's like, don't try to cover up your anxiety. Like, a lot of people are just trying to cover up their pain, suffering, anxiety, when it's like, yeah, that might be the strategy sometimes, but usually that's your body or your mind or your unconscious trying to tell you to change something, whether you change a behavior or behave that you look at things.
Right.
And so you don't want to listen to it.
Right. The problem we're seeing right now is that people are going on Facebook with the express intention of having an argument, right?
Right, kicking puppies on Facebook.
They're basically kicking puppies on Facebook. Yeah. So they'll pick on a libtard or what is the other, a Republic asshole, I don't know what they're called. A right-wing fascist, Nazi, whatever. And that will make them feel self-righteous.
Right.
But there's no need to get involved in any of those discussions. Right? There's no need to have an argument with anyone on Facebook. And
the same thing happens in religion.
Yeah, right. People don't need to do that, right? It's and then I think we get back to your idea of the false morality, right? Which is the idea of which is the don't look for the beam in the eye of the other person, or don't look for the mote or the splinter in the eye of the other person. Look for the beam in your own eye, right? And that's that's what people go on Facebook to do, is to find the splinters in other people's eyes.
So they can ignore the beam in their eye, yeah.
Right, and then they don't have to kick the cat or fight with the girlfriend or whatever. They can have a discussion, in bed or whatever, and say people on Facebook are such assholes.
Or everything's Trump's fault.
Right, exactly, and then they don't have to actually have their own morality at home, because they can project everything onto Trump, Facebook, racism, whatever. And now we have these meta scapegoats, I think.
Yeah, that's why it's like a very religious thing what's going on right now. It's a very unconscious religious behavior, like what's going on with these riots and protests. Like, okay, here's a little political limb to go on, but if they would do much better, because if they go out holding these signs for BLM, Black Lives Matter, they're stuck. It's a religious thing because it's so nebulous. It's like, yes, everyone agrees Black Lives Matter, and then somebody holds up a sign just trying to be like, hey, what about everybody else? Like, what? All lives matter, not white lives, but all lives matter. Then that person will get their ass kicked. So,
well, this is a whole problem with the idea of saying someone is a racist,
right?
Because they're white,
Yeah,
which is racism.
yeah, exactly.
And
It's
saying
like,
white privilege, white guilt is exactly that's racism. So that's a totally false morality being constructed as we watch. And the same with like defund the police. It's like, well, okay, but then what's going to come in place of the police? You know, whatever.
Yeah,
We don't have to get into the politics, but the idea of morality being completely
well, and
turned
it's
upside
like,
down.
well, it's like they don't want any results. So I feel like if they wanted results, they could do something more along the lines. And maybe I don't have my skin tone doesn't give me the position to say this, but just speaking from like a human justice, I don't know. But if they would do something more along the lines of like Black Justice Matters, they could actually get things done because they would have demands that could be met. They could probably get even a lot of Black people released from prison that are maybe there for victimless crimes, those kind of things. But if it's just purely these things that everyone agrees on, like, yeah, sorry, it was an accident. We don't want to have police killing Black people and everything else. Then it's like everybody always agrees on that already. You know, we're all in agreement. Black Lives Matter. And so it can't go anywhere. It's just so that they can go out and say how horrible some people are and how.
But this is, right. This is the issue with morality, right? You're always, where even on the lowest level of morality, let's say thou shalt not kill.
Right.
You always run into the problem of but what if this or that? You know what? I don't have to give very obvious examples like the death penalty.
It's not objective, so it can be absolute. Because it's not objective, it can be true in all cases. So it can be absolute. You can say it's wrong. It's moral to follow truth, right? To look for truth, to search for truth. But sometimes it's moral to lie.
It's tricky, but okay. So again, I think this is where it gets confusing, where your the fundamental axioms or presuppositions can't be justified purely on their own. It's how that they achieve an aim. And so the issue is, what aim is it achieving? And what the ideal and best aim that really people need to get behind, but it's hard to, is that of the best and most mature future and most and not just in material ways, but where everyone is the best that they can be.
Right. And then we say, like, this is why I'm so pushing this the Christ higher self idea, right? Is because if that is the value that is instilled in each individual, then you almost don't need morality, right? You don't need laws, because you have the law of God. And then you get back to what Nietzsche said. What did Nietzsche say? Well, the idea behind God is dead, right, is that is a problem, because God is what imposes morality upon humanity. Now, Nietzsche said it was an atheist, but he saw that was the function of God, to make rules, right? And in that bit of is in Thus Spake Zarathustra, is it? Where he says God is dead, and he said we killed him. God is dead, and we killed him.
His blood is on our hands, blah blah blah.
Right. Festivals can redeem us and wash the blood from our hands. What water can be poured, all that. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a
And then
horrible thing.
and then we have to become gods ourselves, right? That's the conclusion of it, is that each individual has to become a god to compensate for the lack of a god or the
Yeah.
god, right?
Well, okay. And so
The,
this is the big issue, and that's what Jordan Peterson gets into a lot, is that what's his name? Nietzsche, through Zarathustra, didn't really finish his job, or
right.
it's almost like in so doing, because he went crazy when he was like 40 and died a few years later. He did the same thing that we're sort of talking about, where he's like, okay, we got to create our own values. And Jung talked about this a lot, especially if you ever read any of his Nietzsche Zarathustra seminars, is that what it did is it created an inflation or an ego inflation, because he's like, okay, I got my values for myself. And then the frustration that maybe could have fueled his insanity is the values that he got from himself were the same values that were supposed to be received from God, and that's what kind of drives people crazy, and that's what drives atheists crazy, and that's like the whole thing about the silly Sam Harris debate, is that they have the same morality, but they get stuck at certain places because one wants to deny a God, and one other people are going to use God to.
But
So
this is because yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
This is because becoming a god yourself, right, means going against the matrix, right?
The nature of being.
Yeah, it means being higher than anyone or anything, right? And that is, first of all, you don't know how to do that because that's not
That's the
prescribed.
Ubermensch or Superman.
It's not prescribed by anyone. No one tells you how to do that.
Right.
So what you have to do is realize there's a matrix, right, of false morality, and that you have to define your own morality, and then to act that morality out. And as a result of that, you will end up in a very small group of people, who are outside the matrix.
Yeah.
Or just yourself, maybe. Yeah.
Probably often just yourself. Yeah. I mean, and those are the people who, as we discussed, do not project. They do not get angry. They're the kind of Gandhi, Martin Luther King,
or they're at least
Nelson Mandela types, right?
Well, that's like what Jordan Peterson talks about, how that we can achieve the city of God, but what it is that's like on the top of the hill, that to get there we have to carry our cross up to the top of the hill, and then because a lot of people, they focus on the the crucifixion, which you do because we have to always die on a daily basis even, but it's that as that you achieve that, you cause a rebirth. So like that whole story of Christ, however factual or mythological it might be, it totally changed the world as it manifested in the world. And there's just no better, even if it's mythological, there's no better hero story that changes the world than that.
Right, because the heroic act is dying. Right.
Yeah.
Dying for everyone, to save everyone, not just that.
And then that creates the city of God.
You save everyone.
Yeah.
You saved everyone because after he dies, this is how I read it, and I think René Girard reads it this way, is after he died, he came back and told all the people who betrayed him, right?
Yeah.
All his followers got sucked into the matrix, and he came back and said, your consciences are not clear. Like, here I am, I'm still here, and my legacy or my spirit or my body, even memory, whatever,
Archetype.
will like archetype, will like haunt you forever.
Yeah.
And you now, because you've seen my, stigmata, I think, on my hand, you've seen that I've come back. You've seen that there's something on the other side. That is, you therefore have an obligation to die great in style or with grace. And
well, to be a living sacrifice, which is harder,
isn't it?
Martyr.
Yeah, so it's easy to, like I don't know,
but it's not literal death, right?
Right. Well, see, but that's
it's something
the thing.
You're rewarded for, like you're rewarded in heaven.
Well,
and if you say heaven is within, then you're rewarded.
Right.
I don't even
the kingdom of God on earth through a state of being. But go ahead, Roddy.
I don't even think death is necessary, because I remember there was another guy next to the cross, next to Jesus, who was a thief. And he repented in the last minute, and he went to the kingdom of God without all the suffering, and he was a thief. He was an asshole, like Stalin or whatever, right? So you don't need to go through the suffering. Jesus did it because he had a reason. He had a plan. He did it for everyone else, to save the people and all that. That's why he was a bit special, but you don't need to go through all the suffering.
Well, that's a tricky one, because then we're getting into the metaphysics of heaven and paradise and all those things in the metaphysical world. And the tricky thing about that is that could be completely literally the case, but we can't know. But what we can know is the matrix version, so to speak, or the mythological, psychological version on this earth, which is something that can be known. We can sort of objectively look at a person who lives sort of a living sacrificial life, not a martyr life, because you can give
heroic life.
Yeah, there you go. If you live a heroic life, you're constantly transforming the world into a better place. Whereas you can live a cowardly, pathological life for lies or whatever the case, or for your ego, and then you create your own hell on earth. Whether that's going to be for a lot of people like Stalin, or it's going to be just in your own world. So we can see that now. In that sort of thief on the cross example, and to put that into what we can know, it's a big deal how that your memory lives on, and how that you could call it a legacy, and just even if you can die at peace or not. So it's like, if someone is there's some people at the end of life, and they're still like saying like, screw you, all my family members, I hate you guys, you're not getting my money, or whatever the case, and then they can die a horrible, sad death, and everybody hates them, and nobody wants to go to their funeral. If they do, they don't want to say anything nice. But like the thief on the cross is an example that we can objectively see, at least in a mythological story version, because he made that sort of even just a psychological sacrifice at the end. Now he lives on, that we're talking about him 2,000 years later or whatever.
Because he meant it, right? Because he meant
exactly. Because
he made it. And the key thing is, he wasn't angry with those people, those who crucified him, right?
Yeah.
He accepted the consequences of his actions,
right?
And he didn't project them on others.
But that was part of the thing, because he accepted that I'm on the cross here. We're not gonna last long. I'm gonna accept what you say. I'm gonna have faith in you. Maybe that was enough.
Because of the COVID thing, where this idea of no one can die, which is like the popular like morality of today.
If anyone dies, it was from COVID.
No one is allowed to die. To say every death is a tragedy, right? And it could be like a 95-year-old person, like my great grandmother I'm not sure how many greats, but she hung herself aged 96 because her her daughter was 70 and she didn't want to be a burden, right? And this is something we've completely forgotten in this COVID thing, is that people have to die. People are going to die, and in the last 5 years of your life, your quality of life is going to be pretty terrible. Chances are, and hopefully you can go out, with grace, without like causing massive conflict in your family, and we're having people by your side, and
Right.
whatever. But anyway, so because of that, I started thinking about this death topic because it's very symbolic. Like also Jesus on the cross, and death is always a topic in films, and lots of people die in whatever Rambo film or whatever. Anyway, and I quite by accident actually I started reading. Well, no, not so much by accident, but started reading Freud and Beyond the Pleasure Principle, right? Yeah. And he was like a neuroscientist and also like kind of evolutionary biologist. Anyway, so what he kind of put forward, it wasn't just his idea, but that single-celled organisms are basically immortal, because they just split and split and split and split. So some scientist dude did an experiment. I don't know who it was. Did an experiment in a petri dish with one cell, and it split 3,500 times, and he stopped the experiment basically. So one cell, when it splits, it becomes the same cell twice, basically. Or you can say it splits off in one angle, and you get a permanent continuation of the same DNA, right? But then you would have no you'd have no evolution whatsoever, or no purposeful evolution. You might have a mutation, or whatever, but it would be accidental.
Yep.
And so what happened, and however that happened, was you got two organisms, and one was a male and a female of the same species, and then the male released a sperm, and the female had an ovary, which is even, you could say, a separate organism, right? How you define the zygote, right? And they come together and create a third one, which carries the DNA of the parents, right? And that results in evolution, because there's a process by which the male and the female choose each other, or the female chooses the male, right? In the case of the peacock or whatever. So there's some kind of there's some kind of mechanism whereby the female will choose the fittest mate with the best DNA, judging on certain criteria like the size of the breasts or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then in order, then the interesting bit is in order for that to result in evolution, two things had to happen. The interests of furthering the species rather than the individual had to take precedent. So there had to be a meaning in life beyond the individual survival, right? There had to be some kind of imperative to further the species beyond just pleasure, right? Beyond just promoting sexual gratification and well, ego. I don't know if you'd say it, if you talk about a bird or a fish, but you can say ego, right? But there's some kind of mechanism in place that promotes furthering of the species, and then in order for evolution to be possible, you have to have the parents. You have to have some kind of biological decay through death.
Yeah.
So if you don't have death, if the parents live forever, then you have no reason to reproduce, right? Procreate, because you can put it off Definitely. Even in humans, we have menopause, where the females can no longer reproduce. Right. So there's this process of, and in humans, it's a very distinct process of childhood, adolescence, prime, let's say sexual prime, and then parenthood, grandparenthood, and then death. Let's say, breaking it down like that. But then we have all kinds of things in between, like we fall in love and we're heartbroken and we have to get over that, which is a kind of death. And that's part of the selection process for selecting good pairs that work, right, and mates that work, and making sure the DNA passed on is the best DNA, hopefully, right? And there's this randomization in it. But yeah, my point was that because death is a necessarily evolution, because the good of the collective becomes part of the culture, let's say the hierarchy of the way that the group works. So you have a tribe or a herd or a flock of birds or whatever. They have some kind of group, collective morality, let's say, even, right?
Yeah.
Where death is even a part of that. So the aging animal will realize it can no longer keep up. Right. The aging, let's say, elephant can no longer keep up with the herd, and he or she goes off, and they have an actual graveyard where they all go to die. Right. It's a psychological process of withdrawing from the collective for the sake of the collective. Right. And this is what Freud referred to as the death drive. So you had the sex drive, which is the drive to procreate, and then the flip side of that is the death drive, which is what happens when you feel useless to the collective. You don't have any function within the group, right? Because you're not getting laid, you're not feeding your children, you're not doing, you're not protecting anyone. People are insulting you. You're beta or gamma male or whatever, and you fall into a depression, and you either die or you get your shit together, like the lobster in Jordan Peterson's example, and you stand up straight with your shoulders back, and you come back to fight another day. And that's something I never heard before, but Freud came up with that. And I think that affects a lot of the psychology that we have, this idea of the death drive, where people say this, they actually come out and say this is, I wish I was dead, or I'd rather die, not I'd rather die, but I wish I was dead, or I should be dead, I'm no use to anyone. And that's when people take their own lives because they feel,
or they just become
useless.
assholes.
Or they become assholes and take it out on the world and blame the world and destroy things and make themselves feel useful in that way. But that's a kind of like false Batman style vigilante justice. It's not like
right. Well, and again, that's part of why I named the group the Daily Archetype. It was a symbol of we're supposed to go through. Jung used this metaphor for our lives like that of a day, where there's going to be the morning, afternoon, and evening. So the morning would be when I forget the exact how we laid out everything, but it'd be like when you're a young person, that's the morning. You have to get a lot done. You have a lot of energy. The afternoon would be when the sun starts to go. It starts its descent. So that would be like in your mid 30s or 40-ish, because after that midpoint of life, maybe 40-ish, give or take, people and the thing is too is people are afraid of that even when they're like 30 years old. They're like, oh my god, now that I'm 30, I'm going to be 40, and then I'm halfway dead. You know, they start having death anxiety when they're like 30 years old, and so they start operating. But on the other hand, the way that, you know, is more healthy for the individual and the group is you just accept your new roles, and that latter role should be the most important when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s. Is that's when you should be able to be like showing your transformation and imparting wisdom into the world, and birthing psychological babies and freeing people from the matrix. You know, that
Exactly, yeah.
should be happening after your transformation. That usually happen well, because in a couple of his books he talks about how almost never people made that sort of freedom from the matrix or start towards the individuation process until they're in at least their mid 30s, because after that, that's when you kind of like have to realign your values. You go from thinking all about materialism and surviving to reproducing psychological children, and that could be a book, that could be raising a child properly, not just to be a healthy child, but a child with values and morals and ethics and kingdom of God on earth. But yeah, our society's really lost that, where they're like, oh no, and then you have people that are like 50, 60, 70 trying to pretend that they're 30 or 40, whether that they do that through plastic surgery or, you know, they try to behave and act like and hang out with the 30-year-olds or whatever, you know, and like all that. But it's like, yeah, it's like be who you are and all of its glory, and you'll make a better world.
They should want to hang out with you, right? That's the goal. You shouldn't want to hang out with the kids. They should want to hang out with you, right?
Right. Well, and
because you have something to offer.
More healthy and productive society, you know, like it used to be normal, but at least before our generation, that the, you know, family was strong, and that on a regular basis it would be like, oh, I need to talk to my dad and my uncle, or my mom and my aunts and whoever else, you know, people one or two generations up, or maybe my grandfather or grandmother, and, you know, get life advice. But they don't really do that anymore. It's like,
was it like that when you were growing up for you? Or was it already out?
I would say that it was fading out. So I am like on the cusp, but I was born in 82. So I'm on that like transition where I'm like almost a Gen X, but technically a millennial, like a Gen Y sometimes it's called. And I would say that the Gen Xers were sort of that way, but they're also in rebellion to it. But then by the time we got to the millennials, it was like, because it's the way that behaviors and new morality comes about is somebody starts behaving one way, like, oh, we don't need to listen to parents. Parents are stupid. You know, whether that's a 10-year-old or 20-year-old or 30-year-old talking about their parents. And then the parents should be like, no, you're stupid. You need to listen to the older generation. Or maybe they would say that in a nicer way. But what happened, I think, in this millennial generation is, and probably started in the earlier generation, but it was like the kids would be like, older people are dumb. And then the older people would be like, you're right, we're stupid. Where, you know, there needs to be some humility on both sides, where the younger people are going to be like, hey, we need to learn from you. And then the older people are like, you know what, I went through that, and it was really hard to learn it, and I had to go through some hard lessons, but here's how I did it, you know.
Right, but now they would just say, yeah, okay, boomer, you know. And then,
yeah, which
you know.
basically then nobody can learn is what the ultimate thing is, or, you know, the end result is nobody can learn, because we've decided both sides are going to disrespect each other.
Right, and then you end up with this totally false morality that no one can die, and that racism is bad, And
Right.
yeah, because we're all prejudiced, right? We all like see
Yeah.
people dressed in a certain way and
Yeah.
acting in a certain way and speaking in a certain way, and we get we avoid those people, or we become attracted to those people, and it's like
Where it's like really,
the packaging is key.
it's like really the like, okay, there's not a lot of real racists in the world, but if you want to really overcome racism or drug and alcohol abuse or all the horrible problems in the world, Trump supporters or whatever a person might think is the worst problems in the world, it's not go preach it on Facebook or have a protest. It's go make friends with your enemy, because then you can overcome whatever that thing is and you can learn from each other, whatever that it might be. Whether you think a racist is the problem, go be friends with a real racist if you want to start to overcome racism. But you're not going to overcome it. You're only going to make it worse, perpetuate whatever the problem is, with especially if there's violence and restriction of speech and all those things.
Yeah, but it's like victimhood,
Right. Well,
it's a refusal to take responsibility, right. And this is like, this is the problem with millennials or whatever, or their parents were irresponsible and they're irresponsible, and right. They don't even know, they don't even understand what that means, and that's a bigger problem than morality, I think.
Right.
But morality is
like, I don't really understand what racism means. For example, if I'm Romanian and I don't like Russians and Russians don't like me, is that a mutual racism? We're both white. So how many races are there, first of all? I don't even know.
So I don't know if that's more of a nationalism. And okay, Yuval Noah Harari, and I posted it a couple of times in the group, how he made the distinction that by definition, a racist means someone who believes their race is superior to another, and it's because of biology. So somehow, like usually a white supremacist racist is going to believe that white people have high IQs and all this ... means whites are better than blacks, and maybe Jews are the worst, and maybe blacks are the worst, whatever. But they believe that's all on a biological level, or at least primarily from a biological level. Now, that's how it was, and it was very much talked that way, at least in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And but now it's never talked about that way, because people are like, it's hard to find a racist anymore on, by definition. Now people are maybe racially insensitive or culturally insensitive. I think Yuval Noah Harari, in that chapter, he was talking about we need to call it something like being a culturalist or culturalism. So sometimes you need
cultural prejudice or something like that.
Yeah, that would work. But sometimes you need to take into account like one culture versus another, and whether it's black culture, white culture, Asian culture, Russian, Romanian culture, whatever, it's going to have advantages and disadvantages. And as the cultures meld and come together and whatever else, it's like a battle for ideas. The ideas are at war, and that's one thing.
But I don't see any ideas at war. There are no ideas at war. There's like
no, it's a culture war, which will include the behaviors.
But there are no ideas that I see that are at stake. There's no apart from like, should we have police or not?
Okay, so how it comes about in black versus white, I think, is often misunderstood, and sometimes there can be phobias, or people unconsciously behaving as someone who is different from myself is dangerous or whatever.
Yeah,
if
that's okay, but that happens, yeah, of course.
But the idea,
is systemic racism is the thing that people are saying.
But where it often comes in is people are afraid of poverty behavior. So if a person comes up in a home and in a culture, whether that's in America, and they have been in poverty all growing up, and until that they got out of poverty, but they're going to have certain behaviors by having a poverty background, compared to perhaps someone who has been in a life of wealth. And one person will go to Ivy League school and they're going to have values that'll come from that. One person's going to work their way through community college and either drop out or maybe get state university.
I mean, what I see in the black culture in the US, can I call it that, is that you get more bad guys. You also get more than your fair share of heroes emerging from it. And there's a certain amount of struggle,
right?
That in those poverty situations that result in extremes of behavior and more adventurous culture, let's say.
Yeah.
Where there's more good and evil, and there's more at stake.
Right.
And I think white people are let's say jealous of that, as you see white kids dressing like black kids, wanting to be black.
Yeah,
that happens.
It's a really tricky thing, because you have a lot of people like myself, even, who grew up as a poor white person, and that's common. People grow up as poor white people, but then they can get by and maybe even make $1 million, and then we get in trouble as
we
white
don't
people.
need your whole life story, right?
Yeah. but
especially the bit about the $1 million. I hate that.
No, I didn't make $1 million, but I'm saying, but now I don't know. It's like whatever the person's background is, white or black, they can make it out of poverty, and it's like a hero's journey. But on the other hand, making it out of poverty can turn someone into a devil, so to speak, or so on one hand, we want heroes to come out of poverty, but on the other hand, we want to be careful of if they have to lie and cheat and steal and backstab to get out of poverty. A really good book that is one of my favorites, but I wouldn't think so normally, is The 50th Law by Robert Greene and 50 Cent. But he talks about his ascent. It's similar to what Jay-Z went through, although I don't know his story as well. But he's slinging crack on the street corners of Queens, New York, and Harlem, I believe. And he got out of that, and now he's like at least a millionaire, maybe.
The rapper,
yeah. Yeah, 50 Cent. And a lot of people have that story, but it's important that he made the distinction that a lot of people went through the same path and they became violent criminals in their ascent out of it, especially having to go through dealing drugs. And he got shot in the face 9 times at once, so there's a lot of violence and everything else. And so he made that transformation where maybe you don't agree with it because he's just like an entertainer, gangster rapper guy. But he got out of the violence and got out of the whatever, and he's giving something to the world, saying like, hey, look, I learned from that background, and now here I am. And then I don't know if a white person does a similar thing, I don't know if it's different, because we can just like go around like, hey, look, I look like a U.S. senator, so give me a job. And then that's what I feel like the black people get mad about, is that they have to go through like a level of this, and that's like a psychological, like, oh, black people can't, da 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 da, because they're perceived a certain way, whether it's unconscious or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the example of Eminem,
Okay.
who like made a kind of, part of his music is parody,
Yeah.
and part of it goes way beyond like anything the black artists would do because of like, I locked my wife up in the car, my girlfriend, and I threw her in the river or whatever. I don't remember the song, right?
Fuck my mom.
It's like, yeah, right. It's like the most like worst kind of.
It's like
If you say that rap is like a lot of that rap, the gangster rap is the manifestation of the shadow,
yeah.
right? It's like these people come from they they like they rap about the shadow. Like, I killed people. I
Well, they
dealt drugs.
manifest it in a song
Uh,
instead of in real life.
yeah, it's not necessarily true, right? You don't know.
Yeah.
Like, if
It's
these
like a
people did all
mythology.
this stuff, right? They create this myth of badness, and people warm to that because they like that. They like to watch horror films and they like to live out the gangster in themselves through listening to a rap song.
They
And it's
feel
kind
like
of,
they manifest their shadow just by singing along with Eminem or 50 Cent.
yeah, and it makes you feel, I've done it. It
Yeah.
makes you feel kind of powerful and bad, but not, not that I would kick a puppy or anything as a result, but you walk down the street with a bit of swagger, because
Your shoulders back.
because
Sure.
yeah, because you've contemplated how good it would
Right.
feel to be bad and not actually done it.
Or just make a
Uh,
song about it
yeah,
rather than shoot
yeah,
in the
yeah,
face.
yeah, yeah. And if you tell her like a gruesome story or something, you feel good about the fact that it wasn't you who did it. I guess.
Right.
But you have a good, vivid imagination, and you're able to conjure up the shadow in other people, which is good.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Here's like a tricky thing, and this gets into some like deep, like the psychological of the systemic, is that I feel like a white um, a white problem a lot of times is, and it can be any race, but maybe more so with white America. But we very much try to hide our shadow, and then
Right.
what that does is it creates a repression that can manifest in a lot of different ways. Whereas other people, maybe other races, they naturally let their shadow come out, and it can be harnessed in a lot of different ways. Like sometimes I've said, you know what? Maybe if my IQ is a little bit above average, I would trade that to be like about an average IQ. If I could slam dunk, sing, and dance, it's like,
Right. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know if that would be better. Like maybe I would enjoy life more, have a better selection of females, and all those things. If I could just sing, dance, and slam dunk.
Right. Well,
Um,
I went to Sweden on the weekend, and Sweden is a super like egalitarian culture. Let's say they've also welcomed a lot of refugees and various migrants, right, and given them free money and accommodation, and it's quite well documented. They also have the most kind of progressive uh, gender equality laws, and they're really into that stuff.
yeah, they really brag
But
about it.
when I yeah, and then Jordan Peterson says it doesn't really work because the nurses are still women still want to be nurses and men still want to be engineers, and those differences are more pronounced in Scandinavia than elsewhere. Whatever. But being there, sitting on the square, and this is maybe a Scandinavian thing, and maybe Radu can tell me about Romania or London, for example. You live in London, right?
Close to London. Not
Close to
I
London.
don't live in city. I don't like big cities.
Yeah. Well, I'm from Wimbledon, so I can't
I'm in
remember.
maybe
Where are you?
Swindon. It's in
Swindon.
Wiltshire.
Oh yeah.
Small
Wiltshire.
town.
With the magic roundabout.
Exactly. You know exactly the one.
Yeah. I wanna go around the magic roundabout one a few times. So yeah. So what I saw there is no one was prepared to give me eye contact.
It's same
You
here.
know, in the square, or I sat in the square because I had time to kill, and I just looked at people walking past, and I tried to catch eye contact with people, and very few people gave eye contact. And the same thing happens in London, but in Budapest, as soon as I got back, it was a massive relief that you can look at someone and smile, and they'll smile back, and it's completely natural to look a stranger in the eye and say hello or whatever.
Wearing a mask or not wearing a mask.
Even if you're wearing a mask, but it's got a bit worse, the
Yeah.
mask thing, because people are a bit more on
Yeah.
edge. But yeah, it's definitely really, really noticeable in Budapest, Eastern Europe, maybe.
Totally. I thought this is the British culture, you know, all
Yeah, I was surprised, but I'm conscious of it because I think eye contact is a really important method of communication between people, like an icebreaker. If you look someone in the eye, that indicates a certain level of self-confidence and also trust in the other person. And if they look away, then they feel threatened. But what I was thinking was, because of this culture of equality, what you end up with is everyone feels threatened, or everyone feels like they might be a threat. So if you look at a black guy or an Arab guy in Sweden, you might be racist because why are you looking at that person? So
is it a very big city or a little city, by the way?
Pretty big, not the biggest. Malmö.
Okay, like an average size.
Average size, yeah. Like, it has this university. It's not a small city.
I only asked because one thing that I've felt like with that, at least in America, is that in rural America, where we have, like it's going to be a small town, not a small town, but maybe a medium-sized town, like more like where I grew up in the Midwest, where the town might have like 100,000 people or so. People are more like, hey, make eye contact and have a conversation with a stranger, whatever. But living now close to Los Angeles, it's harder to do that. And I don't know if it's necessarily has to do with equality or race. I think a lot of it, and maybe because it's, well, and so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and then I moved here in 2002. So I think it's before it was more like a rural thing, and now maybe even when I visit, it's still kind of the issue back in rural America, because now it's like the whole world is a big city, because before I feel like it was the issue. It's like, hey, here's a friendly little community if we've got like a little rural area of a like small or medium-sized town, whereas in a big city like here close to Los Angeles, it was like kind of like, who could this person be? We're constantly dealing with 1,000 strangers, and could it be a threat, or could it be someone who's gonna help me up the dominance hierarchy or whatever? But now it's kind of weird because there'll be some areas that are going to be more like having community and friendly and look you in the eye and have a conversation even with a random stranger. But I think it's tricky because before it was like how big of a city the area is, and now it's, I think, a lot of that's going away even in the rural areas, because it's like we're just a big conglomeration of like a mega worldwide multi-billion people city, since we're all connected now. So
and then everyone's obsessed with like these issues, and then you're wondering, is that person a Democrat or a Republican, or is that person a white supremacist or a gangster, whatever.
Racist.
Let me.
It doesn't matter because it's dealing with a person, right? But the more like meta-tribal things get.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
not
yeah.
real tribalism. This is like meta-tribalism. It's like
It's not just
perceived, imagined matrix tribalism.
right. Yeah, all these layers.
Right. Let me give you an
To,
from my
go on.
country. We have two counties in the middle of the country which are majority Hungarian, not Romanian. The thing is,
Romania.
Romania, yeah. And we historically don't get along with the Hungarians, like you said, from Budapest. The thing is, we make jokes, and we laugh at each other's jokes. But you couldn't make a black joke. It's not, or a homosexual joke. That's not accepted anymore in America.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been making jokes about each other for thousands of years, and we get along.
You know what's weird though? Okay, this is kind of going overtime a little bit, but that's fine. But okay, it used to be like even just a few years ago, like 10 years ago, but especially as you go more back in time. Now, I don't know about when racism was real, like back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when it was like definitely in your face and KKK and all that. But
in
at
the
least
South,
but at least in the 80s and 90s, and probably in the early 2000s, it'd be like I could have some black friends, I could have some gay friends, and we would all kind of make it's not like a racism thing or even a culturalism thing. It could
It's
be like
not,
I have a Jewish friend and I make a Jewish joke with my Jewish friend. It's not like I'm anti-Semitic and I'm insecure about like the Jews are going to take over. It's like we're just that way. So it's like if it's in a community level, at least it used to be that we can have this friendly banter of they make fun of me for being a ginger or for being a white person, ha ha ha, and then I don't really get into the whole like racial jokes or whatever, but if we make fun of gay people, but like as friends, then it's different. But now it's like,
but that's how you become friends, right? In the first place.
Friends, but now it's like you can't even do that anymore because it's so politicized and publicized and everything else. And because there's no privacy anymore. Now it's like I used to be able to, like, even 10 years ago, I'd be able to have like a private conversation, whether it's with black friends, gay friends, Jewish people, or just like random people of any race. And I could just be like, tell a joke, not that I like hate any race or whatever. And it's not like I'm trying to be, or anybody else in the group wants to like, just be like, LOL, a race, whatever. And it doesn't mean anything. It's just like laughing at life and laughing at our cultures and laughing at people for a long time used to joke on both sides, whether they're white or black, like soul food, like, oh, let's get some Kool-Aid and some okra and all this stuff that's like poor people in the South food. And there's nothing about it. But now it's like you can't even like probably tell a joke about drinking Kool-Aid and having poor people in the South food.
Not gender, identity politics just kills humor, right? You can't smile at someone because, like, what are you laughing at? You can't.
You see, when I was in the U.S., when I lived there for a few years, and I lived in Virginia, where there's a large black community, gangster sort of, and the group I came with, we were Romanian, we could do that because we were seen as foreign. So we were special. We were not the regular white people they deal with. We were guests in their house. So we were allowed to crack jokes like that because we were seen as different somehow.
What year was that, by the way?
5 years ago.
Yeah. I don't know. It's
so fast. I mean,
it's like there's
joke about
speech,
can't anymore.
Freedom of speech going away, especially now that like right now, like I don't know. I just say I'm crazy, or I don't care what people think anymore. So I could just have a conversation, even if it's live broadcasted to the world. But it's like, even if I'm alone with whatever people, you just never know who's recording, or you never know when somebody's going to tweet out like, oh my God, Isaac just said this, and it might mean he's racist, and all this stuff.
This is back to the idea of values. right?
Yeah.
And morality, as I defined it, which is, and Jung talked about the collective shadow, right? Which is
Right.
the idea that the shadow can become a group think,
A herd mind, yeah.
a herd mind of unconscious projection, that spreads like wildfire through the herd, and I think that's really what we're seeing now. Because a hashtag in 2 days or 3 days, a hashtag can be like a global thing, and a hashtag like a so-called good cause can, people in Budapest protesting Black Lives Matter. There's no black people in Budapest, there's a handful, like really few, but this is like, well, how is this relevant to us in Budapest? I mean, we have
That's
other
what I was
problems.
saying about it. As bad as it's getting, I think it's mostly just people want to get out of the house and be around people, and it's like an excuse to. And there was protest before the recent BLM rise, but there were more conservatives that are like, oh no, the liberals think the virus is more serious than it is. Let us out of our house, especially in America, because it was more like conservative governors were pushing for getting people back to work sooner, and the more liberal governors were pushing for people to stay at home as long as possible. And so then it was like, oh no, look at those horrible protesters. But now that it's like for a liberal cause that they don't even know what it is, something about racism, then it's like, well, we're on those side of the looters and the rioters. So it's,
well, this is a false morality, right? And that's always the nature of the shadow. It's like if you have a shadow, an issue with your shadow, like you can't something you can't reconcile, like some violence in your heart, then you go and kick a puppy, or you call someone a racist, or whatever it is. That's how it works. But it's always paradoxical, right? Because you will project what is bad about yourself onto the other person.
Yeah,
right?
what you hate about yourself.
But you project that, so you call that person a name, which when you're actually talking about yourself.
Right, you're becoming racist. You're becoming like a new kind of racist. It's just anti-white instead of anti-black.
Right, and that's how the shadow works, because it manifests itself through violence, or insulting someone, or kicking a puppy, or
so this gets into our topic, which is how do you tell if a behavior or a morality or perceived morality, whether it's true or fake, how do you tell if it's for the right cause or not? And then sort of the acid test is one, does it help overcome the ego or help build up the ego? And then the other is going to be what's its end goal? Like, does it help to make the world a better place in being a more mature, enlightened, free from the matrix people? Or is it going to promote people being more in the matrix and stuck in their lie? So, yeah, that's sort of like the answer to the question. It's not just like one thing, but that's kind of like the acid test or the symbol. Go ahead.
Using that, you can analyze a lot of things and see that they're false. They're false moralities, and people have not questioned before. There were a few even in this discussion, but it's very difficult to bring them up sometimes.
For example, they'll freak out because that's what their false morality is what helps them get through in life. Like, life is very hard. Life is full of anxiety and struggle and everything else. But if they build up this sort of like false substructure of here's how I can justify my existence, which might be as a social justice world or a warrior or a fundamentalist Christian or whatever, they're secure in holding up their ego although if you touch it, if you poke them in their axiom, they freak out. They're like, fuck you, just for like assaulting one of their fundamental axioms or presuppositions, which is how, that's why, okay, originally we were on this thing of the atheist Sam Harris versus whatever Jordan Peterson is, and or mythology and Christianity and religion. And it's like ultimately both should have the same goal, which is to have a more mature future generation and an improving world, but they want their version to be the one on top. It's like another form of tribalism.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's what irritates me about Sam Harris more than Jordan Peterson. Although Jordan Peterson, sometimes his shadow, you see him getting irritated, and that should be like he's provoked a lot, put it that way. But he goes into the lion's den, whereas I don't see Sam Harris does not go into the lion's den. He talks about I don't know Sam Harris that well, but he's definitely someone who believes that everything can be explained. And
I will give him some credit, and atheists in general, that there is some value that they bring in that they root out sort of the false morality and false values that can come up in religion. And he mainly confronts and sort of goes in the lion's den confronting things like on, jihad and the Muslims, and where they can get really violent and can, whatever you call it, misogyny and everything else in the Muslim culture. So there's value there. And I feel like that's where people need to start to come together. Is like, okay, there's value in calling out bullshit where it is on both sides. And, that's where it's like, if you're a Christian or you're a Muslim or whatever religion, it's like, admit that there's going to be bullshit on both sides instead of just
that's what Nietzsche ran up against, is that he had to pick holes in everywhere he looked, because he didn't.
Right.
He saw the faults in everything, obviously, but he didn't. And then that left him on his own, right? Because he couldn't subscribe to anyone's philosophy. He said every philosopher is an involuntary autobiographer, right? So that means that they should have risen to their own, created gods out of themselves, but he didn't dare do that himself. But so I see that Sam Harris will run into that problem if he's just criticizing things for being myths and not provable or true. He will run into the question of what is, in that case, what is true. He won't be able to define that. He will be able to meditate and switch off these thoughts, but he won't be able to ascend to the higher self. Even though he's a successful podcaster and what have you, but which is, I would say, that would be a definition of it. He doesn't, and I see Jordan Peterson also does not quite go that far, which is why he attacks feminists and fascists and communists and whatever, particularly the communists.
He sees value in everybody, and maybe even some in every ideology, but he tries to, see how the lies work and root them out, and then people take that personally, and that's the thing. Like I said, you put somebody in an axiom and they freak out, where it's like, what's the big deal admitting that, like if I'm a Christian, I can say, for whatever reason, Christians have made mistakes just like all humans. And, people, if they idolize Marx or whoever, rather than saying we've got to do, bring about a new Marxist order, they should say, okay, they should focus on their faults. Like if they want to bring about socialism or whatever, start with like, here's all the ways that it's failed in the past. So here's how we can come together, because there is going to be that coming together anyway of.
Well, and then you also get all the time you get the argument, Jung was a Nazi, or Jung was a whatever, homophobe, whatever else. Or he had the other one is he had several
they
women.
did that with Jordan Peterson too. It's basically just your argument for like, if I don't agree with a person, they must be a Nazi.
Right,
so,
exactly.
Because that's the worst thing a person can be. So just project that on them. And that's kind of the thing about Jordan Peterson that made him a particularly tough adversary for everybody, is he wrote out in such great detail and research in his original book and his several hours of lectures online what his exact beliefs were, and where that they were the same or different from the other ideologies. So he can't really be accused of anything. He's that, which makes him sort of like this hero figure or whatever, because he's somewhat spotless in that way. It's just that as he takes down people's axioms and he takes down people's ideology, they hate it, and then they take it personally, and they take it out on him personally.
We have an expression in Hungarian. I don't know if you have it in Romanian. Akinek nem inge, ne vegye magára. If it's not your shirt, don't wear it.
Yeah.
You have that?
Something similar, yeah.
Which means if someone's talking about a group of people, they're not talking about you. Or if I'm talking about someone else, that doesn't mean I'm talking about you. If you take the shirt and you put it on your back, that's on you. The shirt is on you. It's not on. It's not because of what I said. If you found it insulting, that's on you and not on me.
That's the tricky thing with like
and I don't know.
Christianity.
There's no expression for that in Hungarian. In English, no
In English,
shirt, no wear.
I'm not sure if there's exactly in English like that.
It'd be useful to have one.
Yeah. Or maybe we did or something, but we just haven't been using it because people want to wear each other's shirts and put different people's shirts on each other. Well, because that's what people are always trying to do, and it's like, Christians murdered each other 1,000 or 1,500 years ago. So if you're a Christian, you're a murderer. And then at the same time, it's like if they're defending Jordan Peterson or defending Sam Harris, and then somebody attacks Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson, they get offended personally on whichever side that they're on. When it's like, not everything's personal, but people want to get under these logical banners.
I guess the idea of collective guilt comes in this point, like when every German should be guilty for the crimes of the Nazis.
Well, it's
problematic.
It's just that it's easier to not think but take on like a group ideology or a herd mind. And so then you just want to identify with that herd slogan, herd mind, and you want others to do the same, because then you don't have to really think and go through the sacrifice and the transformation and ego death that it would take.
Right.
So,
sorry, Radu.
I have a question. I think it's related. Does the son take on the sins of the father?
Right. That's the question.
What do you mean directly?
No, does the son take on the sins of the father?
Yes, yes.
If the father is a criminal and he done something wrong, is the son to blame? Does he take?
No. The son takes on the guilt of that. What I think is the son takes on the guilt of the father and tries to atone for it, right, and make up for it. Or if the father's really famous or good or successful, then the son will feel like they could never live up to that.
example,
So
black
the
people
sun will
guilt of
destroy themselves because of the success of the father. So it's like you can't really win with your father because you either fail to live up to your father or you feel like angry and guilty at your father because your father let you down. So very difficult.
But you see what
But
that's
definitely,
black people are doing today? That they're taking on the guilt, the generational guilt, and then taking it on themselves as if they've been wronged, which hasn't
Yeah.
happened, as far as I know. But they think they've been wronged, and they're demanding retributions or whatever for some past guilt.
Well, it's both because and that's why they talk about systemic racism and the advantages that maybe I would have that can just like be from maybe the same background in some material ways, but be able to put on the costume looking like a U.S. senator or whatever. So I might be able to get a job that they wouldn't have. So it's both that I can't atone the sins of if my however many great grandfather had a slave, or if even if my father or grandfather was part of segregation and Jim Crow and whatever other racism. I can't atone for that. But their whole point that they're trying to get at is to eliminate the systemic racism. However, what's really tricky about that is then if you push it the way that it's sort of being pushed, it creates like a massive, like a much worse shadow, because then everybody's like super afraid, like, oh sure, you want this job that you're not qualified for, here you go, have it. And or it's like, oh, we can't talk around that guy because of their race or their sexual orientation or gender or being trans or whatever, and so it puts this huge other shadow where it's like, okay, I'm a huge believer that Martin Luther King and Gandhi were heroes by nonviolence and free speech, not just for their people, whether that's Indians or blacks or whatever, but for all of humanity. They freed the world from being that stupid on any side of a tribe or a race or anything else. But they were able to do so through their message of love for one another, And so if we come out with, hey, we're going to love each other and try to help each other no matter whatever side of the debate or the gene pool you might be on, we're going to have a better future. But if you come out with like violence and demands, we start disbanding the police force,
right. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine today the times of Martin Luther King or Gandhi, because who would that figure be? I mean, how would that person emerge? I can't even imagine.
And they were only able to do what they did because of two critical things. Is one, they were able to lay down their life, which is like a major heroic and Christ-like thing, where they didn't, both were assassinated. And, I gave some examples last week, and, you can think of Socrates on one level, as well as Abraham Lincoln, and to a certain degree, Nelson Mandela, who wasn't killed, but he was imprisoned for like 20 something years. But so basically they laid down their life for their cause, but they also made sure to always do so in a peaceful, loving, nonviolent way. And those transformations,
with dignity and
right,
bravery. I don't like to use the word courage, but
yeah. Personal. He's taking it personal around the shirt. So we wouldn't have, now we live in a world that's not completely free of racism and prejudice and caste and all those other problems, but mostly free of it, at least. And we wouldn't have been able to if it wasn't for that type of leadership. And now it's the same thing where we need more of that kind of behavior if we want to have more of that kind of future, or if we get more violence and demands and the behavior that Martin Luther King and Gandhi and all those adamantly opposed. The more violence there is, the worse the problem's going to get. And the more, love and laying down your life and heroic behavior there is going to be, the better the future will be. So that's always the teetering of real morality versus the illusion of it.
Right. I mean, but you couldn't imagine that. You couldn't imagine Martin Luther King at the start of it if you trace the journey. It's like he stepped out of the matrix, basically.
Right.
That was like a big deal.
And he almost did directly because of people like, specifically Gandhi. He was reading all the works of Gandhi. So it's like there would be no Martin Luther King Jr. probably. There was no Gandhi, because he put out a lot of books on his methods of nonviolence, which is a very Christ-like thing, into our, we didn't really get into the God thing, but again, we always get into the whole God behavior and the way that the Gospels manifest itself and like manifest God in this world. But it's a very Christ-like thing is to, like even Christ putting on the ear that was cut off when I think it was Peter who cut off the ear of one of the Roman soldiers. It's very anti-violence, and those who end up divulging into violence are the ones who lose. But then hopefully the transformation is like those after the fact who like felt the guilt of killing the innocent or the hero were able to transform later. And that's like the book of Acts and us today, that we can take on the hero or the meta hero that way. But anyway, it's almost 3 hours.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I would say sort of starting to wrap up is that I'm thinking of this monologue at the end of a show I just finished. I was talking to Radu about it, Mr. Robot, when he's kind of like making one of his final hero speeches where White Rose accuses Mr. Robot, or whatever you want to say his character's name is, of like, look, you just called your group F Society, and he's like, you know what? Yeah, fuck society, because most people are horrible and gross, and society is horrible and gross. But there's these few people, and then he goes on about how there's these few people that are great, and they're worth it, and they're worth dying for, or whatever. But I feel like that's how a lot of people look at it, and probably most people look at the world. And that's even how that like Darth Vader turned to the dark side, is like, oh, I gotta like die for the few people. But the reality is, they didn't really get into this so much, that everybody's like that. Everybody's like that few people that's loving and compassionate and everything. But the thing is, we have this layer, you could almost call it like the Matrix layer. It's like on top of us being like warm, squishy, loving teddy bears, we've got this layer of lies and insecurity and fear, because we're afraid that we're going to get hurt. And so that's what people are afraid of, is that false layer of reality on top of us all being lovey, squishy, compassionate teddy bears. And so we've got to see everybody for the lovey, squishy, compassionate teddy bears that we all are, and then it'll be a better world. But that's tricky because we got to get through the matrix. So I don't know if you guys want to say anything on that before we wrap it up here in a minute.
I think that the easiest way to sum that up is forgive them, for they know not what they do, right? So you forgive people because they don't know any better. They don't.
That shows your own transformation too.
They don't intentionally do you wrong. They can't help themselves. So then you don't feel bad for them. You don't hate them anymore. You understand that I was once like.
Yeah, I would sum up. Just adding to that is the very key thing is to shine a light on the shadow.
Yeah.
So that's like
Light,
Christ the harrowing of in Hades is hold up your light,
your light.
shine a light into the shadows and expose the shadow. And that is like, because the shadow is an unconscious phenomenon, that is actually very, very difficult to do because people don't like it, right? Even though it's the best thing for them, like with your children, even your children, you have to expose their potential to behave badly and say you're watching them, like, you know, I got my eye on you.
Santa's watching.
which will cause them to deny that and be very upset with you for a time, and then they will realize that they're in conflict with themselves, and in time, that's how things improve, and that's why if you with Gandhi practicing non-violence,
Jainism,
through the non-violence and his light, he exposed the shadow in others because they were angry with him, right? They wanted to destroy him. They saw him as a danger, and that's when they realized we're attacking the wrong guy here, and we're the actual problem. It takes an incredible amount of bravery to
Gandhi's a very
pull that off. I don't know much about Gandhi, to be honest. So
he's very controversial. He's the reason there's Pakistan and India. He's the reason the people have divided. They used to be living only in India when it was the British rule, but then they separated, and he had a part in that. So he also divided people. He didn't only bring them together. He kind of segregation, sort of.
Okay,
very difficult. I mean, being Gandhi.
Yeah, but what happened was this interesting thing is it's almost like what happened in the Matrix, you know, and because what happened is there were a couple lies going on. One is the lie of the imperial West, you know, ruling over them. You know, the England was being a bad, bad colonist there, and they were. You know, that was his salt walk or whatever, where it's like you're taxing us if we try to even pick up salt off the, ground or whatever. We're not allowed to do anything. Then the other one that he went on his long fast and almost died for was the caste system in India. And he went against the caste system, which used to be a lot worse and heavier and strangely imposed there. And so those were like two lies. What's that?
The system was like an internal enemy, while the British rule was the external enemy.
So he took on both of them, and then of course there's going to be people on both sides of that. Some will think we need the caste system and we need Britain or whatever, and then some will think the other. And so he was right, but of course, as like whenever there's a war is over, there's going to be some who are going to always say the losers should have won and whatever else. And so then there's going to be those subcultures afterward. So yeah, it's complicated, but he did dismantle. He kind of like threw off the Matrix because he opened up everyone's eyes to how bad the caste system was, as well as the imperial rule of England or whatever. So,
yeah, I mean the shadow idea is.
He froze.
All
right.
Shadow got him.
Anyway.
You froze for a second. You were frozen for like 10 or 20 seconds.
Yeah, there's two things with the shadow. One is how bad you can be, how bad things can get. But the other one is you're not living up to your potential. And people hate to hear both of those things, right? So when someone comes along and says, you're not being what you could be on an individual level and a cultural level even, then that causes a big
I get that
ruction in people, and that causes a
there he goes.
Lost him. All right. I guess it's a sign from God. We need to wrap it up. So I don't know. Do you want to say anything else before we end it?
I was just in the middle of saying that I also get that a lot, not fulfilling my potential because I don't want to. I've worked office jobs which could pay me very well, but I prefer to work a hands-on job as a chef. And people
Okay.
say, "Oh, you're only a chef." You know, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
But
Do what you want.
I could do something else. I could do programming or computers and stuff like that. But it's not an environment I would be
Yeah. It's like your art.
realizing my potential because
But
Yeah,
that's
and
your,
that
you don't have to realize your potential right now,
someone
or
else.
ever. It's like, what is your potential? Your potential is
Right.
in the future, right?
They
It's
tell me,
not like,
"Oh, I see that you could do that. I think your potential could be good in a company." But that's what they see in me. I see something else. I see a different potential.
Well, okay, this
it's
gets
up to
into
you to decide,
Of course, I'm
and
not gonna.
not for or me or Isaac,
It's
well,
whatever.
light to
well,
yourself. You are talking about being a light. You should be a
yeah.
light to yourself, not listen to other offers, other
Yeah.
like you said,
Well, and
marketing
you know, people,
like
the
that. And
culture will
so
always
someone else.
the culture and individual will always be at war. That's just how it's going to always be. That and however much that one might be kind of right or kind of wrong, and the other might be different, and that's what sort of creates the environment for the hero to be a hero. Like the culture isn't that horrible, and our world is actually not in that bad a position, other than some of these recent things that we'll get over.
If it would,
That's
there would be
one thing that people forget is we're always constantly improving, even though we go through these weird things like we're going through right now.
I think that if it would be more horrible than this, then there would be more heroes. Because
Yeah.
heroes, they only come up in an environment which is rotten, you see, which is already corrupt. There's a need for heroes to come up. Otherwise, you say, "Oh, let someone else be a hero." It's not that
Yeah,
bad.
and it's strange right now because the psychological environment is just such a weird thing right now, and nobody knows how to navigate it anymore because it's so much different whether you have your people and your friends and then your local community, your state, and everything else, because everything's so interconnected globally now, and that has its advantages and its different disadvantages. But I think the main disadvantage is that people just don't know what to do with it, and they don't know what all the benefits are and all the false benefits are and all of the opportunities. So we're just trying to put together this world that is really complicated.
A lot of layers, a lot of different shadows and different projections work.
Matrix. And I was going to say that gets into Adrian's meetup group issue. Maybe we'll do another one in the next, I don't know, a couple weeks or whatever, where in the that whole it's one thing if somebody's telling you, when somebody tells a person this is how to behave, they're really worried about themselves, their own liability. If it's like, oh, go out, like if you tell a person to like be an artist because that's their real dream, they don't want to do that. They don't want to say, hey, go be a chef or an artist or something where it's like your real dream, because maybe they won't be able to pay their bills. Then they'll be like, hey, fuck you, you told me to be an artist or a chef or whatever,
Right.
and now I can't pay rent and I can't marry the girl I want to marry. And so they try to, because it's their own egotistical idea of their self, of they don't want to say, they want to say, do this safe thing that will
Parents
slowly
do that. Parents do that
yeah
all the time, because they made those mistakes. Maybe they chased the dream and didn't come off, and then they would tell their kids not to do that.
What they're worried about more than anything is that the kid will, and maybe it's unconscious, but the kid will fail and then they'll get pissed off. So, but then on the other hand, if it's them, like in your second example at the meetup from the week later or whatever, then it's like, oh, if it might be me in the story, then I need to pursue meaning and pursue like fuck the world, and because so that's the thing,
it's
is on the
easy to
individual.
tell someone to do that, though.
Yeah, so
It's easy to give.
Matrix, Matrix was a good example.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, we should wrap it up. So I don't know, anything you guys want to say before we wrap it up?
No, it was a good chat. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so yeah, let's do it again sometime in the next couple of weeks. We can do it a little bit earlier so we can have some Europeans, and I'd like to have you guys in with hopefully Jesse and Jonathan, just because they're more on the materialist atheist side. So maybe in another couple weeks or so.
We'll ask them about. Sorry.
Go ahead. You were first.
I was just going to say we'll ask them about their transcendental experiences.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, the reason is though is because we've been on these subjects and related ones for a long time now, and I was hoping, this is like the closest I got to it. They weren't here, but I was hoping to get some idea for like, Sam Harris's moral landscape. I haven't been able to make sense of that. The only thing I get from anybody like Jordan Myers is read the moral landscape, but it's like, can't you just tell me? Like, you have an hour, just tell me what. Or like Sam Harris, you've got like 8 hours. Tell me about the moral landscape and how it makes sense. But
is that his book?
Yeah, that's his book for how, sort of how we get morality without religion, kind of thing. Yeah. So.
I agree with Sam Harris. I watched a video of him today explaining how the West is the best, as in morals, that we should export the Western morals to other countries, like wearing burqas in Islamic countries, and that's not okay because we are more morally,
That's
aware.
what Sam Harris was saying.
Yeah. And how can you push that? I mean, who do you think you are?
Yeah. Well, and I feel like what that gets into is one of my first points on what I think the gospel really is it's a transformation. And so hopefully if we're more transformed in a more, I don't know if you'd say evolved or mature religion or morality, then other people want to follow it, but only because we've been able to demonstrate its benefit or maybe utility, rather than just be like, hey, this works for us, so take off your burqa right now and be like the Kardashians.
There's no justification.
That's how it comes across.
There's no way you can justify that.
Yeah.
You're imposing your morality on someone else, and that's
right. But on the other hand, if we are a better light on the, or city on the hill, or light to the world, then people will want to transform and be like, and I don't think it'll ever be like, oh wow, America's so great or the West is so great. It'll be sort of like little heroes, or people who are able to be examples of how to live a transformed life in this modern, complex, matrix-like world.
Yeah, well, to wrap up the meaning of life conversation, which you have with with that meetup, we had the meaning of life conversation, and the meaning of life conversation. No one ever says, "I want to have a good wife." No, they never say, "I want to have a good wife and I want to have kids and a house." Nobody now, like the boomers were the last generation to say that, right? That's totally gone out of fashion. That no one says the meaning of life is anything to do with
family,
the interaction between men and women, right? Apart from sex and Tinder, that's as far as it goes, right? And then what is the meaning of life if that isn't even part of the conversation? Then then how are we going to learn morality if there is no family, let's say, or no? And then you get into very traditional discussion, but surely morality is predicated on the interplay between the individual, the family, the community, and in all these hero films and Harry Potter and whatever, and I think Jordan Peterson has said that the parents are always dead. There are no parents in the stories, like whatever, Simba in the Lion King, whatever. The parents die. So there is none of that thing of living up to the mother, living up to the father, or none of the like key interactions that we have in our lives. Like how much our parents define us through,
What's your
what Freud.
maximum potential? That's what I think your parents are. Your parents are like an example of your maximum potential. When you look at them, you'll probably end up in a similar way to your parents.
They're your template for life, right?
Right, but they're also
Model.
just a symbol of society, the dominance hierarchy, nature, and not so much physical nature, but like psychological nature that comes from the world.
Right.
Like if anyone's parents disappeared, whether it was at their birth or at any time in their life, society is always our parent. And we don't like that because that makes us like so heavily dependent on society that, well, and here's kind of like the big issue is that because we're so heavily dependent on society and we're nothing without it for generations and everything else, we owe it something. And what we owe it is to give something back to it that will improve the future generations of it. And that is super hard, but somehow we always do it.
Yeah, but it was easier in the more traditional sense to
It wasn't
live up
necessarily easier. It
live
might
up.
be easier
What
now,
I'm
but
saying
it
is
was
living up to the expectations of your parents, or you could do something quite modest and
yeah.
live up to the expectations, right? Because within the small family matrix, right, there may be conflicts and disagreements, but that is a structure to live within, where people live within the family and don't have to go outside it if it's a large family. But now the family is such a global thing, right? That the meaning is lost essentially.
Well,
But it's never my just brief like point, which I'd like to talk about in future, is this issue of like of the family structure and how so much of psychology is predicated on the
that's how mine's
relationship, the relationship with your parents and what you've been passed down by your culture and different generations. And when you become a parent, like I have two kids, what you're going to pass on to your kids then becomes like a super important issue.
right.
And that is not addressed in our culture these days at all. Because every hero is a lone hero, no parents. Harry Potter,
There's no courses for being a good parent, university for parenting or something like that.
No, well, parenting didn't come into it until recently. There weren't books on parenting. Parenting was a thing that you did. You set an example to your children.
Books in
right?
my life, and I asked my mom about it. Why did you read this? Wow, that you were interested in this. So that's good. I know other parents who probably weren't.
Well, you're the example that your children. If I look at who I married or who other people have married, or I talk to a lot of people who divorced or whatever, and it always comes down to their husband or boyfriend, whatever, was like their father.
Yeah.
They married the wrong person because the person they married was their father, and their father was not the good guy, right?
You know what that is? That gets into the idea of like a meta father, which is kind of a godlike projection, in that we, because we have interacted with, this is how that we perceive ourselves in relation to authority figures, or figures that we really, what an authority figure is, and what a parent-child relationship is it's like this back and forth dichotomy of struggling for dominance and struggling to become a mature person. And so then that gets projected from childhood to then relationships in adulthood, and that's how it gets on to being like almost like a God thing. It's like a God image or a meta father image, meta mother image that's imprinted on our minds that then we project on other people.
Well, the opposite is true then of Darth Vader, when the famous "I am your father," I am your father, Luke. And that gets everyone right, because everyone feels that punch in the gut that I've inherited evil from my parents, right? And everyone feels that archetypal pain of my father is Darth Vader, basically. And I may be Luke Skywalker, or I think I am, but I've got a hell of a thing coming, because I could turn to the dark side, and maybe I should, because my dad is the king of the Lord Vader.
We punch babies and kick puppies and abuse our spouses or whatever else, whether it's psychologically or physically or whatever, because we're trying to project what we don't like ourselves on the world, so that we feel like we have control over it. But then when we see it, like, hey, like we try to say, like, those evil people are racist, when we're being racist ourselves by trying to say evil people are being racist. So it's whatever that we project on the world. They're bigots, they're fascists, they're communists, whatever. It's like what we hate.
It's not as simple as that with your parents. When you realize, like, I've inherited this bad side of me from my parents. That fucks people up, and it's not in the discussion at all. It is if you talk about psychology, because psychologists are always digging in your parents, stuff. But it's not in our culture. I don't see it in our culture today that you can have a succession.
They try to hide it, because we all have, to a certain degree, daddy issues or mommy issues, whether when we thought we were neglected, or we need to fight with our parents more, or whatever the case is. But usually
it's uncomfortable to be confronted with that, right? It's one of the most uncomfortable things that you face.
That's when people will usually bury it and hide it, and then the only way out is either to come to religion and confess it to God or whatever, or to get with a therapist.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I brought that up is if we're very into talking about the Matrix, let's say, as this global thing, and Black Lives Matter, and it's a global movement, and climate change and problems with society are like global problems. But like, really, the Matrix could be just our family. It could be just our parents and the partners we choose, and our kids or cousins or brothers and sisters. That is as much part of the Matrix as, like, Black Lives Matter or COVID.
And it's all in our head too. There's a whole matrix that's all inside of our head.
Right.
Like all those sub-personalities. And that's why did you ever watch Mr. Robot, Adrian?
No.
Okay, well, Ryder and I were talking about a little bit, but basically, I mean, I don't want to give away the ending, but you see it in the beginning too, that it's dealing with a lot of psychological issues of what's in like you see really quick in season 1 that it's like a Fight Club thing of like projections of an alter ego and that type of thing. And then as the seasons go on, you realize that there's just more and more of the projections inside of a person's head. And so we have a whole matrix inside of our head, and then we project that onto our families or our pets or our nature, whatever's around us, our objects. And then
they project it onto us. That's also
right. It goes both ways. And then the hero's journey is to help people withdraw their projections, because that's what like overcomes the devil or the Agent Smith or whoever, But
Here's the question that I asked before. Does the son inherit the sins of the father? Like, if Mr. Robot molested
okay.
Elliot as a child, does that mean that Elliot will become a child molester? If my father hates gypsies, does that mean that I will hate gypsies?
So it would be a thing that. So if a father is into anything,
I mean that
the child may have that potentiality, but the child or the next generation, as they grow up, they can overcome that.
No, but
So
it might be something different, right? It might be not. You might not hate gypsies, but you will have some. It will manifest in some way, right? Maybe you will rebel against it and do something equally stupid in the opposite direction, right?
if my experience in my environment growing up with gypsies were only positive experiences, then what my father tells me, I won't believe it. I'll have my own perception, my own value set, which trumps that value set given from my father.
Yeah, but his attitude to gypsies is a projection of something in himself, right? If you,
so it's
so
some might be genetic and some will be the environment from the father. But the example Jordan Peterson gives sometimes is how that statistically, so like sometimes people try to act like everyone who is abused as a child is going to abuse their children.
Yeah.
And the reason that they'll sometimes say that is because they want like an easy reason for like why a person is bad, whether they are abusive or whatever the case is. But statistically, if that were the case, everyone would be abusive by now, because statistically, after so many generations, just everybody would be abusing all their children. So what happens is there are definitely some abusive people out there abusing their children and their spouses and whatever else. But the next generation has the then choice to either repeat that potential behavior or to overcome it. And so go ahead.
Are people who, like murderers, criminals, are they a bad seed? Like genetically, they have something from their fathers passed over, which makes them be evil.
Well, that's what I was just. No. So
is
there
Isaac
is.
still there?
Yeah.
Did I freeze?
All three of you disappeared.
Oh no.
I can see you, Radu, but not Isaac.
He's still here. He's moving.
Yeah.
Can you see me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, there have been a lot of genetic observational things into the behaviors that even a child there'll be like babies that are weeks or months old, in their first year or two of life, that will show moral behavior on either side. There'll be greedy babies and asshole babies, and there will also be that just seems like that's handed down genetically, that they're naturally that way. On the other hand, there will be generous babies and gentle, loving babies just naturally.
You see that with dogs, with puppies, you can see that already.
Right. So there is a genetic component to it, but as we become more conscious and mature throughout our lives, just like as an adult, you can say, wow, I have a bad temper. I have a propensity to anger. I need to be careful because naturally, like my father, or whether it was genetic or not, I can, fly off the handle and cuss people out or want to punch people in the face and all this. And so then as you become an adult, you have the chance to, learn to control the greed or the being a dick or being a horrible person or whatever, including things that would potentially lead to murder. Although I feel like things that lead to that bad of a antisocial behavior, they don't happen that easily. They're more things that happen after like layers and layers of going down the bottomless hole of covering things up.
Here's what happens, I think, is like people lay their shadow on you. Like you feel it. If you're in an argument with someone and they're like insulting you incessantly, right?
Yeah.
That has a psychological effect. You know, when you've been in an argument and then you feel like this burden on top of you, like someone's crushing you.
Yeah.
And you feel defeated.
Yeah.
Even though there's no reason for you to feel that way.
Right.
And that's because you've taken the burden on from the other person, right?
Right. The empath.
Yeah, we're all like that though. They've attacked you and picked a fight with you to unburden themselves. Right?
Yeah, unload their garbage.
Unload their shit onto you, and the fact that you carry it, you take it on, relieves them, right? Because they've scapegoated you. The less you fight back, the more of a burden it is, right? And because a child is innocent, right? You can beat a child. Yeah. They won't do anything. So
they'll just take the burden. Yeah.
You can unburden yourself on your children. You can shout at them and be an asshole to your children, or you can behave in an immoral way in front of your children. Let's say you can swear at gypsies or pick fights or whatever, and they will feel like pity for you, or empathy for you because you're so angry, and that in that way they lay their shadow on you, and you feel I don't know if it's really guilt, or you feel helpless. You want to help them. You feel helpless. But the fact that you want to help them is unhelpful to you, right? You want to rescue your father from the belly of the whale. You want to help your father become a better person, but that's really not your job as a kid. You're the person who should receive guidance in the first instance, right, from your parents. But then there comes a time when. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I just said that's where you save the father inside of you. So instead of that father perpetuating to the next generation, being a whatever it might be, asshole, racist, rapist, whatever, you can't change your father, but probably, or fairly low likely.
I think you can.
You can, but what you can definitely do is change that potentiality that's in yourself.
Yeah, but when you do that, then your father will hopefully notice it and see it,
right?
Because you throw off the shadow of your father at that point.
Right.
At that point, your father can no longer make expectations of you, because he sees that you are the better man than your father, right? And at that point, he's completely humbled because his shadow is revealed, right? And then and he's fortunate because you've saved him, and literally you have saved him.
Yeah, that's where you saved the father from the belly of the whale. Yeah,
and it literally that actually I think really happens with people. You have to realize the process of it, though.
Yeah.
So that's a cool direction to go in terms of the hero thing, because or the meaning of life thing, because it's not all about saving the galaxy. Star Wars is a family drama, really.
Yeah, soap opera. Even George Lucas said that.
Yeah,
it's an intergalactic soap opera.
Well, no, family. Yeah, so if you say soap opera, then I guess there's a family involved, usually several.
Intergalactic family drama. But that's representative of like the matrix of, society being the mother and father and everything else.
Well, there's many levels of it. But Christ and the Virgin Mary, the top of the hierarchy.
All right, well, let's wrap it up, and we'll do it again in a week or two, and hopefully we'll get the other guys in with us and see if we can figure out the moral landscape and everything else. maybe even find God and rescue our fathers from the bellies of whales.
All of that.
All right.
All right,
Thanks,
guys.
Roger,
Thanks.
and we'll see you in the next couple weeks.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.